Hey guys, tonight we wander into the golden hush before dawn, where the Sahara still exhales the cool breath of night and the first camels appear like patient ships on a sandy sea. You stand on the edge of Timbuktu's market quarter, toes brushing dust that has traveled farther than most people ever will. The horizon is painted in soft indigo, and somewhere out there, beyond the flanked dunes, a caravan creaks forward under slabs of salt carved from the earth itself. The air tastes faintly mineral, as if someone dissolved a pinch of the ocean into the wind. You probably won't survive this, at least, not without a sunburn, sore feet, and a sudden appreciation for shade. The Mali Empire in the 14th century is not big on iced beverages or ergonomic sandals, but you are here anyway, blinking in the half-light, trying to look like someone who belongs, among traders who measure wealth in bricks of salt and pouches of gold dust. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what the local time is. Is it midnight in Mumbai? Early evening in Edmonton? Pre-dawn in Paris? I love imagining this quiet caravan of listeners stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first camel reaches the outskirts of the market, just as the sky shifts from indigo to a pale apricot. Its long eyelashes blink in slow disapproval of civilization. Behind it trail dozens more, each draped in woven packs and carrying rectangular slabs of salt nearly as tall as your torso. These are not delicate table shakers of seasoning. These are dense, pale blocks from the mines of Tagaza, hacked straight from ancient seabeds that dried up millions of years ago. Mainstream historians agree that salt from Tagaza was one of the economic backbones of the Mali Empire. Transported hundreds of miles across the Sahara to cities like Timbuktu and Gao. You step closer, and the camels groan softly, sound somewhere between a rusty door hinge and a tired uncle getting off the couch. Their handlers, wrapped in indigo-dyed veils, move with unhurried efficiency. These are experienced caravan men, likely Tuareg guides who know the desert's moods better than you know your own kitchen. Historians still argue whether the Tuareg fully controlled the salt routes at certain periods or shared authority with manned merchants, but either way, their desert knowledge is the reason this entire operation functions at all. The market itself is still assembling. Wooden stalls stand like skeletal frames awaiting their daily transformation. A few early vendors sweep yesterday's dust into neat little clouds, which promptly resettle somewhere else because the Sahara does not respect your cleaning schedule. You watch as two men begin unloading a slab of salt. They use simple wooden levers, grunting in rhythm. The block lands with a heavy thud, sending a tiny puff of white crystals into the air. One quirky detail you might not expect: at Tagaza, some buildings were reportedly constructed from salt blocks themselves, held together with mud. Imagine living in a house that doubles as a giant seasoning cube. Scholars debate the accuracy of certain travel accounts describing this, but multiple medieval writers mention salt-built structures, suggesting at least some truth beneath the exaggeration. As more caravans arrive, the open ground fills with movement. The camels kneel in a synchronized ripple, folding their legs beneath them with dramatic sighs. If camels had social media, their captions would read, "Just walked 800 kilometers. No big deal." You reach out to touch one salt slab. It is cool despite the warming air, faintly rough, and surprisingly beautiful striations of white and pale gray, layered like a minimalist desert cake. A merchant approaches, eyeing you with mild curiosity. You are, after all, dressed in whatever imagination has provided. He checks the ropes, securing the load, and nods to a younger assistant, who begins counting the slabs aloud. Counting matters deeply here. Salt is not merely flavor, it is preservation. In a world without refrigeration, salt keeps fish edible, meat usable, and trade profitable. Entire communities depend on these blocks to survive lean seasons. As the sun peaks higher, a golden wash spreads over Timbuktu's mud brick walls. The city is already a renowned center of trade and Islamic scholarship. By the 14th century, under rulers like Mansa Musa, Mali's influence stretches across West Africa. Mansa Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 is said to have displayed such extraordinary wealth, particularly in gold, that it affected Mediterranean economies. Whether the economic impact was as dramatic as some chronicles claim is still debated. But there is no question his journey put Mali firmly on the medieval world map. You squint toward the eastern road, where another caravan approaches in a slow, hypnotic line. The rhythmic clink of wooden saddles and the soft thud of padded feet form the market's morning soundtrack. No honking horns, no text notifications, just wind animals and human voices rising gradually in greeting. Someone laughs nearby. A boy attempts to lift a small fragment chipped from a larger slab and nearly drops it on his foot. You resist the urge to invent steel-toe sandals several centuries early. Instead, you inhale deeply. The scent is a mixture of dust, leather, sweat, and something faintly metallic from the salt itself. The day is just beginning, and already you sense the quiet magnitude of what is unfolding. These caravans represent months of preparation water stored in goatskins, routes memorized by stars, negotiations made in distant oases. Historians still argue whether the trans-Saharan trade was more driven by North African demand or West African initiative. But standing here, watching the salt arrive, it feels like a shared choreography shaped by necessity and opportunity alike. The sun climbs a little higher. The market will soon swell with buyers, scribes, and storytellers. But for now, in this delicate sliver of morning, you stand at the threshold between desert and city, between silence and commerce, between the ancient seabed locked in salt and the living empire that depends on it. A camel turns its head and fixes you with a slow, unimpressed gaze, as if to say, "You're not carrying anything. Must be nice." And honestly, it has a point. The light strengthens. The day begins to hum. The light stretches wider across Timbuktu, now turning the mud brick walls a soft honey color, and you step fully into the market's waking pulse. What was a skeletal arrangement of stalls moments ago begins to bloom into something layered and alive. Mats are unrolled with practiced flicks of the wrist. Wooden tables appear beneath woven awnings. Clay jars are set down in tidy rows, their rounded shoulders catching the early sun. You move carefully, as if afraid to disturb the choreography. The ground beneath your sandals is already warming, and you make a mental note that by midday it will feel like walking across a very polite but determined stove. The marketplace sits at a crossroads of world's desert caravans from the north, river traders from the Niger to the south and east. Timbuktu's rise in the 14th century as a commercial hub is well documented. It flourished particularly under the Mali Empire, positioned strategically near the Niger River while still accessible to Saharan routes. That geography is not accidental, it is destiny shaped by sand and water. A group of merchants gathers near the newly unloaded salt slabs. They squat in a loose circle, examining edges, tapping surfaces, checking for cracks. Salt from Tagaza is valued for its density and relative purity, though not every slab is perfect. Some blocks crumble slightly at the corners, and those will fetch lower value. You watch a trader rub his thumb across the surface, then taste a grain thoughtfully. It is an oddly intimate gesture, like sampling the personality of a rock. Nearby, a woman arranges small leather pouches filled with gold dust. She ties each one with careful knots, then sets a tiny balance scale beside them. Gold in the Mali Empire often circulates in dust form, rather than minted coins. While gold coins exist in North Africa and Europe, here in West Africa, gold dust measured by weight is common in everyday exchange. You realize that the world's most sought-after metal is being weighed out like flour for baking. If you sneeze at the wrong moment, you could technically cause an international incident. You drift past a stall displaying kola nuts, their reddish-brown shells polished to a faint shine. Traders chew them for energy and appetite suppression. One man cracks a nut open with a small stone and offers you a piece. The taste is bitter, almost medicinal, and you resist the urge to ask for honey. Caffeine courses quietly through the market's bloodstream, long before espresso becomes fashionable elsewhere. The sounds multiply. Camels groan, wooden crates scrape, greetings ripple through the air in Arabic and manned languages. "Peace be upon you," one merchant calls, and the response comes warm and automatic. Islamic influence is deeply woven into the Mali Empire by this period, particularly in urban centers like Timbuktu. Mosques anchor neighborhoods, and scholars travel here to study Quranic texts. Yet the market itself is a blend of traditions: Islamic, indigenous, practical, all braided together by trade. You pause near a scribe, seated cross-legged on a woven mat. Before him lies parchment and a reed pen. He is writing slowly, carefully, likely recording transactions or drafting correspondence. Literacy, especially in Arabic, holds prestige here. Timbuktu will eventually become famous for its manuscript libraries, preserving texts on theology, astronomy, law, and medicine. Historians still argue whether the city's scholarly reputation has been somewhat romanticized in later centuries, but surviving manuscripts prove there was indeed a vibrant intellectual culture intertwined with commerce. A boy darts past you carrying a clay jug of water, sloshing dangerously close to your ankles. You step aside just in time. Hydration is serious business in this climate. Wells are precious, and water sellers weave through the market, offering relief in exchange for a few cowrie shells or a pinch of gold dust. Cowrie shells, small, glossy whites, circulate here as currency too, especially for smaller transactions. They originate from the Indian Ocean and travel vast distances before ending up in West African markets. The idea that a tiny shell from tropical waters can purchase grain in the Sahel feels like something out of a very slow, very polite global economy documentary. And yet here it is, Globalization, Medieval Edition. A pair of older men begins a measured negotiation over a salt slab. They speak calmly, almost gently, as though discussing the weather rather than a commodity worth weeks of travel. There is no shouting, no dramatic gesturing, just patient back and forth. Market etiquette here values composure. Losing your temper would signal weakness or worse. Desperation? You try to imagine modern online shopping functioning this way. Greetings, honored seller. Might we discuss the price of this blender over tea? It would be revolutionary. The sun climbs another notch, and the scent of warming leather and animal fur thickens. Somewhere behind you, someone begins roasting millet cakes on a flat iron surface. The nutty aroma drifts through the air, mingling with dust and salt. Your stomach responds immediately, reminding you that you have not eaten since arriving in this century. You notice that the market is not chaotic in the way you might expect. It has zone salt near the caravan entrance, foodstuffs closer to shaded corners, textiles hanging where breezes can flutter them enticingly. Indigo-dyed cloth glows almost blue-black in the morning light. The dye sometimes rubs off onto skin, tinting it faintly. Tuareg traders are often called the blue people by outsiders because of this indigo transfer. It is a small, quirky detail that makes the entire marketplace look faintly brushed with twilight. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's population, at its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, reached 100,000, or if that number is exaggerated. Regardless of exact figures, even in this 14th century moment, you can feel the density of exchange. Goods, stories, beliefs, ambitions, they circulate as freely as dust in the air. A camel suddenly snorts behind you, startling a cluster of pigeons into flight. Feathers flutter down lazily. You glance back at the salt slabs, now stacked neatly, waiting for buyers. Just hours ago, they were part of a distant desert mine. Now they are potential meals preserved, taxes paid, alliances strengthened. The market is fully awake, and you are standing in its heartbeat, watching an empire measure itself in crystals and gold. The sun lifts a little higher, and the last of the caravans groan their way into the open stretch at the market's edge. You wander back toward the camels, drawn by the quiet industry of unloading. Up close, the scale of it becomes clearer. Each animal carries 2, sometimes 3, rectangular slabs of salt strapped along its sides with leather thongs. Some caravans number in the dozens. Others, the truly ambitious ones, can include hundreds of camels moving in a long, swaying file across the Sahara. Trans-Saharan caravans are not casual weekend outings. Mainstream historians estimate that a journey from the salt mines of Tagaza to Timbuktu could take 2 months or more, depending on weather, route, and political conditions. 2 months of sand, sun, and rationed water. You consider your own tolerance for discomfort and decide you would have requested a refund on day 3. A handler clicks his tongue softly, guiding a camel to kneel. The animal folds down with theatrical reluctance, its long neck bobbing. You watch as 2 men slide a wooden pole beneath a slab and lever it down carefully. The salt lands upright in the dust with a dignified thud. They repeat the motion again and again, a rhythm as steady as breathing. You notice how methodical everything is. Water skins are checked first, then harnesses inspected. Only then does the salt come off. Desert logistics are unforgiving. One broken strap hundreds of miles from an oasis could mean losing a load or worse. caravans typically travel between established wells spaced across the Sahara, places like Arawane or Tikrit. These oases are lifelines, and knowledge of them is guarded carefully. Historians still argue whether specific routes shifted frequently due to climate fluctuations or remained relatively stable for centuries, but everyone agrees that without these water points, the salt trade would collapse overnight. A wiry man with indigo veil wrapped high across his face gestures toward the horizon as he speaks to another trader. You catch fragments of conversation about wind patterns and shifting dunes. Sandstorms are a constant threat. One quirky tidbit you overhear. Some caravans carry small pieces of ostrich eggshell, not just as containers, but as symbolic charms for safe travel. Whether this is widespread practice or an isolated custom is debated, but it adds a quiet layer of ritual to the otherwise practical march across the desert. You crouch beside a pile of equipment laid out on a woven mat's pair, leather straps, wooden pegs, a coiled rope thick as your wrist. Everything looks worn, but carefully maintained. Nothing flashy, nothing wasted. Even the camels themselves are selected for endurance rather than beauty. Dromedaries, with their single hump, are uniquely suited for Saharan travel. They can go days without water, their bodies regulating heat in ways that feel almost unfair to the rest of the animal kingdom. You silently apologize to every horse you have ever admired. Nearby, a young apprentice counts the unloaded slabs again, touching each one as he murmurs numbers. Accountability matters. A missing slab is not just a minor inconvenience. It represents weeks of labor at the mines and weeks more of travel. The Tagaza mines themselves are notoriously harsh. Workers there extract salt from underground deposits left by ancient seas. Accounts from medieval travelers describe the settlement as bleak and isolated, with little vegetation and brackish water. Mainstream sources confirm that Tagaza was an inhospitable place, populated largely by laborers who endured difficult conditions to supply the empire's demand. You watch as one trader produces a small leather pouch and shakes out a handful of dates. He passes them around to fellow caravan members, a modest celebration of safe arrival. The dates are wrinkled but sweet, and the gesture feels ceremonial. After months of rationed meals and vigilant travel, reaching Timbuktu is both economic triumph and personal relief. A camel suddenly swings its head toward you, sniffing your sleeve with deep suspicion. Its breath is warm and grassy. You resist the urge to explain that you are technically just visiting from several centuries in the future and mean no harm. The camel remains unconvinced. The coordination between caravan leaders and market brokers fascinates you. There is no loud announcement of arrival, no ringing bell. Instead, word spreads organically. Buyers drift closer. Evaluations begin almost immediately. Some salt will be sold locally. Some will continue southward along the Niger River, exchanged for gold, cola, nuts, or agricultural goods. Gold and salt form a complementary pair in West African trade. Gold is abundant in regions like Bambouk and Bure, while salt is scarce in the forested south. This ecological contrast fuels exchange. It is not simply luxury driving trade, it is survival. Historians still argue whether the phrase "worth its weight in gold" originated directly from the salt trade in West Africa or elsewhere, but here in Timbuktu, the comparison feels literal. You notice that not all caravans are equal in size or confidence. One smaller group hangs back, their loads modest. Perhaps they encountered trouble along the wayrader's illness, lost animals. The Sahara is not empty. It is a vast terrain crisscrossed by competing interests. Tuareg groups often act as guides and protectors, but alliances shift. Protection may involve negotiated payments or long-standing relationships. The system is less lawless desert and more intricate web of agreements, though from your modern perspective, it still feels like the ultimate trust exercise. The sun warms your shoulders now, and the market hum grows thicker behind you. Yet here at the caravan edge, there is a pocket of focus. Camels chew lazily. Men retie knots, wipe sweat, murmur prayers of thanks. The salt stands stacked in pale towers, catching light along their edges. You run your fingers once more along a slab's surface. It feels solid, dependable like condensed time. Weeks of mining, weeks of travel, months of planning, all distilled into this single block that will soon change hands in a negotiation as calm as morning tea. A breeze passes through, lifting a faint veil of dust around your ankles. The desert has delivered its cargo, and the day is only just unfolding. You find yourself staring at one particular slab of salt, as if it might whisper its autobiography. Its surface is faintly striated, thin lines running horizontally, like the pages of a very heavy book. And in a way, it is a book one written by an ocean that vanished millions of years ago, long before camels, before Timbuktu, before even the idea of empire. This region lay beneath shallow prehistoric seas. Over time, water evaporated, minerals crystallized, and vast salt deposits formed. Now, in the 14th century, you're touching the geological leftovers of a vanished world. The traders speak of Tagaza with a tone that mixes pride and mild discomfort. The mines sit deep in the Sahara, north of Timbuktu, in a landscape that feels less like a home and more like a challenge issued by nature itself. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that Tagaza was one of the primary salt sources for the Mali Empire. Medieval travelers such as Ibn Battuta wrote about the settlement in the 1350s, describing its isolation and the unusual architecture made from salt blocks. Imagine arriving at a town where the walls themselves glint faintly white in the sun because they are built of the very commodity you re-extracting. Reports suggest that workers used salt slabs for construction, plastered with mud to hold them together. Historians still argue whether entire structures were truly made of salt or whether this detail was somewhat exaggerated by wide-eyed visitors, but enough references exist to suggest it was not pure fantasy. Either way, it's safe to say your homeowner's insurance would be extremely confused. You picture the miners at Tagaza. They descend into shallow pits or carve into exposed deposits, hacking away at dense layers with iron tools. The air there is hot, dry, and unforgiving. There is little vegetation. Fresh water must be brought in from elsewhere. Some sources indicate that laborers were enslaved individuals or prisoners of war, though the exact composition of the workforce remains debated. Historians still argue whether Tagaza's labor system was primarily coerced or if there were also paid workers seeking economic opportunity. The truth likely varies across periods and circumstances. A merchant beside you gestures toward a slab and mentions how many men it took to extract and transport it. You realize that this block Vivi been admiring passed through countless hands before reaching this market, miners chiseling it free laborers, hauling it to staging areas, caravan handlers loading it onto camels, guards protecting it across sandstorms and uncertain territory. Salt may look plain, but here it is layered with effort. You walk slowly along the stack, noticing that some slabs are cleaner, more uniform, while others carry faint, sandy streaks. Quality affects price. Buyers prefer dense, intact blocks that can be cut into smaller pieces later. Salt from Tagaza is particularly prized because of its size and ease of transport in standardized slabs. Think of it as medieval bulk packaging, no plastic wrap required. One quirky detail you overhear from a trader. Sometimes, smaller fragments broken off during mining are used immediately at Tagaza to flavor meals or preserve limited food supplies for the miners themselves. The irony is, rich literally living atop wealth, yet rationing it carefully. You imagine a miner shaking salt from his own house wall into a stew and chuckle softly? Talk about seasoning with structural integrity. The desert between Tagaza and Timbuktu is no gentle corridor. Caravans must plan departures carefully to avoid the worst of the heat. They often travel in cooler hours and rest at midday. Camels are loaded strategically, balancing weight evenly to prevent injury. A single injured camel could jeopardize the entire caravan's schedule. Logistics in this era are less about spreadsheets and more about memory, experience, and shared oral maps. You crouch near a trader who is explaining the route to a curious buyer. He traces lines in the dust with a stick marking oases indicating stretches of open dunes. These routes are not always fixed highways. Sand shifts, wells dry, political tensions alter safe passage. Historians still argue how climate fluctuations in the medieval period may have affected the intensity of trans-Saharan trade. But there is little doubt that environmental variability shaped decisions year after year. As you rise, the sun catches the salt stacks again, making them glow almost luminous against the earthen backdrop of Timbuktu. The contrast is striking. Pale slabs from the barren north, now resting in a city that thrives on intellectual and commercial exchange. It feels like the Sahara has delivered not just mineral blocks but entire stories of endurance. A camel handler laughs as he recounts a sandstorm from the last journey. He describes how the wind swallowed the horizon, how the caravan huddled low while the sky turned copper. You imagine being enveloped in that swirling wall of grit and decide that perhaps your modern weather app has made you soft. The market noise grows behind you voices, rising scales clinking, children weaving between adults, yet your mind lingers onto Gaza's stark horizon. The mines are distant, but their presence hums through every transaction about to unfold. You brush a bit of salt dust from your fingertips. It sparkles faintly in the sun. From ancient seas to Saharan pits to camelbacks to this market square, this single slab has traveled farther than many kings. And it is only you drift back toward the center of the market just as the first serious exchanges begin. The salt slabs are no longer just impressive geological souvenirs. They are now currency in motion. A woven mat is laid flat on the ground, and atop it rests a small brass balance scale, the kind with two shallow dishes hanging from delicate chains. It looks almost too fragile for the weight of empires, and yet here it is, steady and precise. A merchant kneels on one side of the mat. Opposite him, a buyer unties a leather pouch and pours a thin stream of gold dust into one of the scale-S dishes. The particles catch the sunlight like tiny sparks. You lean in, mesmerized. Gold in the Mali Empire commonly circulates as dust, measured carefully against standardized weights. Mainstream historical records confirm that West Africa was one of the world's richest gold-producing regions in the medieval period, supplying much of the Mediterranean and European markets through trans-Saharan trade. The salt slab in question has been chipped slightly at one corner to create a manageable segment. The merchant breaks off a smaller piece with controlled force, the crack echoing softly. He places the salt chunk into the opposite dish of the scale. The bean dips, then steadies. A small iron weight is added to balance the measure. The two men watch in silence, eyes fixed on the trembling line of equilibrium. Historians still argue whether salt was literally traded weight for weight with gold in all cases, or whether that phrase became a symbolic exaggeration over time. The ratio likely fluctuated based on supply, demand, and region. But here, in this moment, watching gold dust and salt share the same delicate balance, the metaphor feels tangible. The buyer adjusts the gold dust slightly, adding a pinch more from his pouch. The scale tips. The merchant nods once. Agreement, there is no handshake, no flourish, just mutual understanding. You notice how carefully the gold dust is handled. Even the smallest spill would be costly. Some traders carry tiny feathers or flat wooden sticks to nudge stray grains back into the scale. One man briefly moistens his fingertip to pick up a stubborn fleck, then pauses, realizing the gold now clings stubbornly to his skin. He chuckles softly, shaking his hand. Even wealth refuses to be rushed. Nearby, another transaction unfolds using cowrie shells instead of gold. The glossy white shells are counted into neat stacks. Cowries travel extraordinary distances, often originating from the Indian Ocean and moving through complex trade networks before reaching West Africa. Their presence here is proof that this marketplace is linked not just north and south, but east and west across continents. You overhear a younger trader whisper that he once saw a pouch of gold so full it required two men to lift it. You suspect mild exaggeration medieval bragging rights are alive and well. Still, the wealth flowing through Mali during this era is undeniable. Mansa Musa's reign in the early 14th century cemented Mali's reputation as extraordinarily rich, especially in gold. His famous pilgrimage to Mecca, during which he reportedly distributed so much gold in Cairo that it affected local markets, remains one of the most cited examples of medieval wealth display. Historians debate the scale of that economic impact, but the story persists with impressive staying power. A slight breeze lifts a swirl of dust across the mat. Everyone instinctively shields the scale. Precision matters. The gold dust is poured into a fresh leather pouch once the transaction is complete. The salt piece is wrapped in cloth to prevent crumbling. It will likely be carried south, perhaps toward farming communities where salt is scarce but desperately needed to preserve fish and meat. You realize how practical this entire system is. Salt and gold complement each other geographically. Gold fields in regions like Bambouk and Bure produce abundant precious metal. While salt is rare in forested zones, conversely, in the Sahara, salt is plentiful but gold is not. Trade arises naturally from this ecological contrast. It is less about luxury than about balance, like the scale before you. One quirky tidbit drifts through conversation. Some traders test gold dust by gently biting it, not unlike modern cliches about gold coins. While biting gold can indicate softness, it is hardly a precise scientific method. Still, habits persist. You resist the urge to suggest laboratory assays and instead admire the confidence of these merchants who rely on experience, touch, and reputation. Reputation is everything here. A trader known for fair measures will attract repeat partners. A dishonest merchant risks being quietly avoided. There are no glowing online reviews, just memory and word of mouth. In a market where everyone depends on long-distance relationships, trust is as valuable as any mineral. A man beside you scratches numbers into a small wooden tablet tracking quantities exchanged. Written records supplement memory, especially for larger deals. Timbuktu's broader scholarly environment supports literacy, and Arabic serves as a lingua franca for trade across North and West Africa. The blending of oral agreements and written notes creates a layered system of accountability. The sun warms the top of your head now. The air shimmers faintly. Yet the negotiations continue with calm patience. No shouting, no frantic bargaining, just steady voices and the occasional soft clink of metal weights. You glance back at the salt stacks. They are already shrinking. A single slab, once part of an ancient sea, now transforms into preserved meals, paid taxes, secured alliances. Gold dust, once buried in riverbeds, now moves northward in exchange. The scale steadies once more. Balance achieved.
The market thickens around you like a slowly simmering stew. Negotiations continue at the salt mats, but your attention drifts outward, pulled by the expanding orchestra of sound and scent. Timbuktu's market is no longer waking. It is fully alive, layered, and textured, humming in every direction at once. You step past the salt stacks and into a corridor of stalls shaded by woven reed mats stretched overhead. Sunlight filters through in soft stripes, striping the dust with gold. The air carries a blend of smells that feels almost architectural in its complexity. Warm leather, camel fur, roasting millet, wood smoke, dried fish, sweat, and the faint mineral sharpness of salt itself. A woman kneels beside a low table arranging calabash bowls filled with ground spices. The colors are earthy reds, browns, deep yellows. She sprinkles a pinch of one mixture onto her palm and gestures for you to smell. It is smoky and slightly sweet. While salt dominates long-distance trade, local markets thrive on everyday goods, grain, vegetables, cloth, tools. The salt you saw weighed against gold will eventually flavor meals like the ones being prepared just steps away. Mainstream historians emphasize that Timbuktu was not solely a salt and gold exchange point, but a diversified commercial center. Goods from North Africa textiles, horses, books flowed south, while gold, ivory, and agricultural products moved north. You see that diversity now in the sheer variety of items laid out before you. A blacksmith's stall rings with the rhythmic tap of hammer on metal. Sparks flick briefly before fading in the bright morning light. Tools are displayed carefully. Knives, small farming implements, metal fittings for saddles. Ironworking has deep roots in West Africa, and local smiths are highly respected artisans. Some communities even attribute spiritual significance to blacksmiths, viewing them as mediators between earth and fire. Historians still argue how widespread such spiritual associations were across different man-speaking groups, but the aura of quiet respect around this stall is unmistakable. You pause as a herd of goats squeezes through a narrow passage, their bells chiming gently. A boy tries to maintain control, though one particularly ambitious goat attempts to nibble at a hanging strip of dyed cloth. The cloth vendor shoos it away with exaggerated indignation. Even goats appreciate fine textiles, you think, suppressing a smile. The indigo fabrics flutter lazily overhead, dyed so deeply they appear almost blue-black. Tuareg traders are often nicknamed the blue people because the dye can rub off on skin, leaving a faint tint. It is both fashionable and slightly inconvenient. Imagine explaining to your friends why you're permanently tinted sapphire. The sounds of bargaining weave through everything. Not aggressive, not hurried, measured. A woman's voice rises gently in argument over a basket of millet. A man counters with a shrug and a half smile. The negotiation feels almost like a dance, each side performing patience. Children dart between adults carrying small trays of water or cola nuts. The cola's bitterness cuts through fatigue, providing a quiet stimulant that keeps traders alert. One boy offers you a nut with solemn seriousness, as though initiating you into a secret guild of wakefulness. You accept, chew carefully, and immediately wish you had a medieval mint. Somewhere nearby, dried fish are stacked in neat rows, their salty aroma strong but not unpleasant. Salt preserves fish from the Niger River, allowing it to travel inland without spoiling. Preservation is power in this climate. Without salt, food security would collapse. It is easy to romanticize gold, but salt sustains daily life. Historians still argue whether certain preservation techniques spread primarily through trade routes like these or developed independently in multiple regions. Standing here, watching fish, grain, and salt coexist in easy proximity, it feels inevitable that knowledge travels alongside goods. You pass a stall selling leather goods, sandals, pouches, water skins. The leather smells rich and earthy. A craftsman uses a bone tool to press decorative patterns into a strap. His hands move slowly, deliberately. There is no rush. The market may hum, but time here stretches differently. Transactions are conversations, not speed tests. A faint breeze stirs, carrying the distant bray of a camel and the murmur of recited prayer from somewhere beyond the market's edge. Timbuktu's identity as a center of Islamic scholarship blends seamlessly with commerce. The sacred and the practical overlap without friction. You catch sight of a man gently shaking a woven basket to winnow grain, letting chaff lift and drift away. The motion is soothing, repetitive. Dust rises and settles like a slow exhale. It reminds you that much of this market's rhythm is agricultural at heart harvest cycles, river levels, seasonal caravans. One quirky rumor drifts past your ears. A trader insists he once saw a salt slab so large it required 10 camels to move. You suspect embellishment, but in a place where exaggeration is a mild art form, you let the story float by unchallenged. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten. The hum intensifies but never becomes chaotic. Timbuktu's market breathes in layers, metal ringing, goats bleating, fabric rustling, scales clinking, voices negotiating in calm cadences. You inhale again, deeply. Dust and spice and salt. It is the smell of an empire in motion.
The hum of trade softens slightly as a small circle forms near the edge of the market square. You notice it first by the subtle shift in posture merchants, who moments ago were intent on scales and sacks now. Angle their bodies toward a single-seated figure, a griot. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, a carved wooden lute resting against his shoulder. The instrument's body is rounded, its strings taut and waiting. His robe is simple but clean, and his voice, when it begins, carries with it the steady cadence of someone entrusted with memory. You ease closer, settling just within earshot. The market does not stop, exactly, but it adjusts. Sound bends around him. Even camels seem marginally less dramatic for a moment. Griots are hereditary storytellers, prize singers, genealogists, and historians in man's societies. Mainstream historians recognize their crucial role in preserving oral histories across West Africa. In cultures where written records were not always the primary method of preserving the past, griots carried lineages, treaties, victories, and cautionary tales in memory, passing them from generation to generation. The griot plucks a string gently, then begins recounting the lineage of a prominent merchant family standing nearby. He names fathers and grandfathers, tracing their trade partnerships back decades. The merchant listens with composed pride, as if the recitation itself is a form of wealth. You realize that in a marketplace built on trust, oral history is not just entertainment, it is infrastructure. Reputation lives in story. A family known for fairness becomes more valuable with each retelling. Historians still argue about how precisely oral traditions align with archaeological and written evidence, but few doubt their social power. Even when embellished, they shape identity and behavior. The griot shifts from genealogy to news. Word has traveled from the north of shifting political winds among Berber groups along certain desert routes. He mentions tensions near an oasis, whose name you struggle to catch. Merchants exchange glances. Information about caravan safety is currency as real as salt or gold. You feel the subtle gravity of it. News spreads not through parchment bulletins, but through voices and memory. A single story can alter the path of a future caravan. The lute's melody rises and falls, soft but steady. The griot recounts a moment from the reign of Mansa Musa Hao, the emperor's pilgrimage to Mecca, astonished Cairo with displays of gold. The crowd murmurs approvingly. Whether every detail of that journey unfolded exactly as later chroniclers describe is still debated by historians, but its symbolic weight is undeniable. It cemented Mali's reputation as a land of immense wealth. The griot's tone shifts gently, adding humor. He jokes about a merchant who once tried to haggle so long that the sun nearly set before agreement was reached. Laughter ripples through the circle. You suspect a merchant in question may be present and pretending not to recognize himself in the tale. 3 small boys sit near the front, wide-eyed. They lean forward, absorbing each word. In a world where literacy exists but is not universal, memory is trained like a muscle. The boy's mouth phrases silently, rehearsing. You wonder which of them might someday carry these stories onward. A quirky detail emerges in the narrative. The griot describes a legendary camel so stubborn it refused to kneel until sung to. The image earns another soft round of laughter. Whether this camel existed or is a metaphor for difficult negotiations remains charmingly unclear. You notice how seamlessly the sacred and secular intertwine. The griot praises Allah in one breath and a merchant's bargaining skills in the next. Timbuktu's Islamic identity does not erase local traditions. It overlays them, blending recitation with commerce. A woman beside you whispers that certain griot families can trace their lineage back centuries, serving particular noble households. Their social position is complex, respected for their knowledge, yet sometimes bound by hereditary roles. Historians still argue about the nuances of caste-like systems within man's society, and how rigid they truly were across time and place. The melody slows. The griot's voice softens into a closing blessing for safe travels and honest dealings. The circle dissolves gradually, like ripples fading on water. Merchants return to their stalls. Scales resume their careful tipping. Goats reclaim their wandering rights. But something has shifted. You sense that the marketplace now hums, with slightly updated knowledge routes reconsidered, reputations reaffirmed, alliances subtly strengthened. You glance back at the salt slabs stacked in patient towers. They arrived this morning heavy with physical labor. Now layered atop them are stories of journeys, emperors, stubborn camels, and distant oases. The market breathes in again, and memory travels just as surely as salt. As the circle around the griot dissolves, you notice that many of the most confident voices in the market belong not to the men weighing salt, but to women seated behind carefully arranged goods. They sit upright on woven mats, backs straight, eyes sharp, hands busy. Their presence is neither ornamental nor peripheral. It is central. You wander toward a stall where a woman oversees several baskets filled with grain and dried okra. A small balanced scale rests beside her, and to younger girls, perhaps daughters or apprentices, organize cowrie shells into tidy stacks. When a customer approaches, she greets him first, voice calm but firm. The negotiation that follows is measured almost graceful. Mainstream historians note that in many West African societies, women played significant roles in local and regional trade. While long-distance caravan leadership was often male-dominated, market exchanges, especially in foodstuffs and daily goods often, involved women as primary actors. The scene unfolding before you confirms that commerce here is not a one-gender performance. You watch as the woman adjusts her headscarf and gestures toward a basket of millet. The buyer counters with a lower offer. She smiles faintly and shakes her head, tapping the rim of her scale as if to say, "Numbers do not lie." There is humor in her expression, but also authority. You suspect she has won far more negotiations than she has lost. A group of women nearby clustered around a different stall, displaying dyed cloth and glass beads. The beads shimmer in the sunlight blues, greens, and translucent whites. Some likely arrived through North African trade routes, possibly even originating as far away as Venice or the Middle East before filtering southward. The idea that tiny glass beads could travel such distances feels astonishing. Yet the trans-Saharan trade network was vast and interconnected. One woman laughs softly as she tests the strength of a strand of beads, tugging gently. "If it breaks before I leave the market," she teases, "I will return it with interest." The vendor raises his hands in mock surrender. The exchange feels playful, but precise. Historians still argue about the degree of economic independence women held within the Mali Empire. Some suggest that Islamic legal traditions may have provided women with certain property rights in urban centers, like Timbuktu, while indigenous customs also shaped their roles. The exact balance between these influences likely shifted over time and region. But standing here, watching women direct transactions with confidence, it is clear they are not passive participants. You notice a woman trading small quantities of salt for vegetables. The salt has been broken into manageable pieces, less dramatic than the towering slabs near the caravan entrance, but equally vital. She weighs a chunk carefully against a handful of cowrie shells, then nods in agreement. Salt flows downward through the market, from massive slabs to daily seasoning. A quirky tidbit floats through conversation. Some women are known for memorizing not just prices, but entire webs of familial alliances across neighborhoods. She knows who owes whom from 3 harvests ago. One man whispers, half admiring, half wary. In a marketplace where credit and trust interlace, such memory is power. You pass a stall where a woman grinds spices with a stone mortar and pestle. The rhythmic motion produces a soft, steady sound, almost hypnotic. She pauses to wipe her brow and smiles at a toddler playing beside her with an empty calabash bowl. Commerce and childcare coexist seamlessly here. There is no separate workday and home life. Everything overlaps in the open air. A cluster of older women sits together under a broader patch of shade, discussing what appears to be collective purchasing. They pool cowrie shells into a shared cloth pouch, debating how much grain to acquire. Cooperative strategies reduce risk, especially in uncertain seasons. Drought, river fluctuations, or caravan delays can disrupt supply. By sharing resources, they buffer against instability. Historians still argue how formalized such cooperative arrangements were, whether they functioned as structured guilds or more informal kinship-based networks. But the practical logic is clear. Collaboration strengthens resilience. You notice that some women wear subtle gold jewelry, thin bracelets, or small earrings, likely purchased with gold dust saved from prior trades. Gold here is not only an export commodity, it also circulates locally as adornment and stored wealth. The glint of metal at a wrist catches the sun briefly before disappearing beneath cloth. The market's rhythm continues, layered and steady. A woman haggles over a leather water skin, pressing it gently to test for leaks. Another inspects a stack of pottery, tapping each vessel to hear its tone. There is discernment in every gesture. You realize that the salt slabs you saw weighed against gold earlier will eventually pass through hands like these. Broken down, redistributed, integrated into kitchens and storage rooms. The grand scale of empire dissolves into daily sustenance. A faint breeze stirs, lifting the edge of a woven awning. Dust swirls lazily. A woman laughs at something you miss, her voice bright against the steady hum. Trade here is not just caravans and kings. It is grain measured carefully, salt pinched precisely, and women who remember everything. You drift toward a shaded corner where transactions seem quieter but no less intricate. Here, away from the larger salt slabs and bustling food stalls, currency itself becomes the focus. Not the goods, but the ways of paying for them. A trader sits cross-legged with 3 small containers laid out before him. In one, gold dust, fine as powdered sunlight. In another, cowrie shells, glossy and pale. In the third, small, irregular metal pieces, likely imported coins from North Africa. The coexistence of these forms fascinates you. It is as if 3 economic systems are politely sharing the same mat. Mainstream historians confirm that the Mali Empire operated with a mixed monetary system. Gold dust was common for larger transactions, cowrie shells for smaller exchanges, and foreign coins circulated especially in dealings with North African merchants. Standardized minted coinage was not the primary internal currency in Mali, unlike in some Mediterranean economies. Instead, value was often assessed by weight and reputation. You kneel nearby as a man pours gold dust into a scaled dish. The trader counters by placing a small iron weight in the opposite pan. These weights are carefully shaped and standardized, often part of a merchant's personal toolkit. Accuracy is everything. A scale that cheats by even a fraction risks damaging trust permanently. Historians still argue how tightly regulated such weights were by imperial authority versus local custom. Were there official standards enforced by the man's administration, or did merchant guilds and communal norms maintain consistency? The evidence suggests a blend of both, but the precise balance remains debated. A young apprentice beside the trader carefully counts cowrie shells into stacks of 5, then 10, then 20. The shells click softly against one another. You learn that cowries traveled from the Indian Ocean, especially from regions around the Maldives, through complex trade routes that eventually brought them to West Africa. Their journey spans continents. You imagine a single shell, once tumbling in tropical waves, now purchasing millet in Timbuktu. One quirky detail you overhear. Some merchants carry small leather pouches divided into compartments to separate different currencies. It resembles a medieval version of a travel wallet, maneuvers the credit card slots and loyalty program points. A customer approaches with a proposal involving partial payment in gold dust and partial credit to be repaid after harvest. The word credit catches your attention. This is not merely a barter economy. It includes trust-based lending. Traders extend goods with the expectation of future payment, often secured by reputation or kinship ties. You watch the two men discuss terms quietly. The trader nods slowly, then scratches a notation onto a wooden tablet. Literacy in Arabic script supports such record-keeping, especially in urban centers like Timbuktu. The city's broader scholarly culture spills naturally into commercial practice. Written contracts coexist with oral agreements. A man beside you leans in and whispers that some debts can last across seasons, even years, especially if drought disrupts harvests. Environmental uncertainty shapes economic behavior here. The Niger River's flooding patterns influence agriculture, which in turn affects market liquidity. Historians still argue how climate variability in the medieval Sahel impacted the stability of trans-Saharan trade. But few deny that ecology and economy are deeply intertwined. You notice that not all currency is purely material. Social capital relationships, alliances, family ties carries weight too. A merchant known for fairness might receive better terms or more flexible credit. Conversely, someone rumored to default may struggle to secure favorable deals. A small dispute arises when a buyer questions the purity of gold dust offered in exchange. He rubs a pinch between his fingers, examining its color. Gold from different regions can vary slightly in hue depending on mineral content. The trader responds calmly, offering to reweigh the amount. Tension flickers briefly, then dissolves as the scale steadies again. Precision resolves suspicion. You glance at the metal coins in the third container. Some bear inscriptions in Arabic, likely minted in North African cities such as Fez or Tunis. These coins travel south with caravan merchants, facilitating trade across cultural boundaries. Yet here, in Timbuktu, they share space with gold dust scooped from local rivers and cowries gathered oceans away. The blending of currencies mirrors the blending of cultures in this market. Islamic legal principles, indigenous customs, Saharan nomadic traditions all interlace within daily transactions. A trader chuckles as he recounts a story of a novice merchant who once spilled an entire pouch of gold dust into the sand. The crowd winces collectively. He spent hours sifting, the man says, and still swore the earth grew richer that day. You imagine crouching with a sieve in the blazing sun and decide that careful knot tying is an underrated skill. The scale tips again. Gold dust slides, cowries clink. A notation is scratched onto wood. You begin to see that the salt slabs stacked at the market-s edge are only one side of the equation. Without these intricate systems of measurement, memory, and mixed currency, the slabs would remain inert blocks. Instead, they move. Through weight, through trust, through shells that once touched distant seas. By now, the sun has fully claimed the sky, and the gentle honey light of morning hardens into a bright, unwavering gold. You feel it pressing against your shoulders, warming the top of your head, turning the dust beneath your sandals into something that radiates heat upward. Midday in Timbuktu is not dramatic, it is relentless. The market responds accordingly. Activity does not stop, but it adapts. Traders shift their mats deeper into shade. Woven awnings are adjusted, pulled lower to block the highest angle of sunlight. A few camels are guided toward the edges where scraps of shadow cling to mud brick walls. Even the goats seem slightly less ambitious. You follow the example of everyone around you and step beneath a canopy where several merchants sit in a loose semicircle. A clay water jar rests in the center, its surface damp from evaporation. One man pours water into a small cup and passes it with deliberate care. Hydration here is communal and measured. Water in the Sahel is too precious for careless gulps. Mainstream historians note that Timbuktu's prosperity depended not only on desert caravans, but also on its proximity to the Niger River. The river's seasonal floods nourished agriculture and supported urban life. Without that watery artery, this marketplace would wither. You picture boats gliding along its currents even now, loaded with grain and fish, destined for stalls like these. A man beside you begins greeting newcomers with extended pleasantries before discussing business. "Peace be upon you," he says. "How is your family and your camels?" Only after this exchange does he mention salt or gold. Market etiquette here values patience and relationship building. Rushing directly to price would seem abrupt, even disrespectful. You attempt to mirror the pace, nodding solemnly, as if you too have camels whose well-being must be discussed. It feels oddly grounding. In a world without emails or ticking clocks, time expands to accommodate courtesy. Historians still argue whether such elaborate greetings were primarily social conventions or also subtle tools for assessing a counterpart's stability and alliances. A greeting can reveal much tone confidence, hidden tension. Here, conversation is reconnaissance wrapped in politeness. A group of traders fans themselves with woven palm fronds. One jokes that the sun must be attempting to negotiate its own tax on the market. Laughter rises softly. Humor, like water, cools the atmosphere. You notice that transactions slow but do not cease. Scales continue to tip gently. Cowries still click into stacks. A woman adjusts her headscarf and calmly reweighs millet for a customer. There is no frantic urgency. Heat enforces a rhythm of efficiency without haste. A peculiar custom catches your attention before finalizing a particularly large deal. Two men lightly touch hands and murmur a brief prayer. It is subtle, almost private. While Islamic law influences commercial ethics, emphasizing fairness and prohibition of certain exploitative practices, local traditions shape the exact rituals. Historians still debate how strictly Islamic commercial jurisprudence was applied in 14th century Mali verses, how much practice was guided by customary law. In the market, the blend feels seamless. You shift position as the ground warms further. Even sitting still requires minor strategy. Shade creeps slowly across the square like a cautious traveler. You begin to appreciate architecture in a new way. Mud brick walls, thick and insulating, keep interiors cooler. Courtyards provide pockets of relief. The built environment is not ornamentalette, is survival. A trader unwraps a small bundle of dried meat and sprinkles a pinch of salt across it before eating. The gesture is simple but profound. Salt extends shelf life, preserves protein through journeys that would otherwise spoil it. Without salt, caravans themselves would struggle to provision. The entire system folds back on itself. A boy walks by carrying a clay vessel filled with a fermented drink made from millet. He offers small cups to resting merchants. The drink is slightly sour, refreshing in the heat. You sip cautiously, grateful for anything cool. One quirky tidbit drifts through conversation. Some traders claim that salt blocks sweat in extreme heat, forming tiny beads on their surface. Whether this is scientifically accurate or merely poetic description of mineral condensation, you find yourself glancing toward the stacked slabs to check. The midday call to prayer echoes faintly from a nearby mosque, carried on warm air. Movement in the market pauses gently. Some traders step away, washing hands and feet with measured splashes of water before prayer. Commerce yields briefly to devotion. It is not a disruption, but a recalibration. You remain in the shade, listening to the hum soften. Even the camels seem contemplative. The sun sits high, unwavering, and the market breathes slower, now steady, patient, waiting for the long arc of afternoon to begin its descent. The brief hush after prayer settles like a thin layer of dust, soft, temporary, and soon stirred again. As traders return to their mats and awnings are adjusted once more, a subtle shift passes through the marketplace. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, but it is noticeable. Two men enter from the direction of the administrative quarter, dressed in clean, modest robes with an air of quiet authority. They carry leather satchels and wooden tablets tucked beneath their arms. No fanfare accompanies them, yet conversations dip slightly as they pass. Imperial tax collectors, you feel the temperature change not from the sun, but from awareness. The Mali Empire, under rulers like Mansa Musa and his successors, maintained a structured system of taxation on trade. Mainstream historians agree that revenue from trans-Saharan commerce, especially gold and salt, formed a significant pillar of imperial wealth. Duties were often levied at key trade centers and along caravan routes. The collectors moved methodically toward the stacks of salt near the caravan entrance. One kneels beside a merchant, exchanging formal greetings before beginning his task. There is no accusation in his tone, no suspicion. Instead, he asks measured questions about the caravan's origin, its route, and the number of slabs delivered. You watch as the merchant responds calmly, gesturing toward the neat towers of salt. An assistant begins counting aloud. The tax collector marks figures onto his tablet using a reed stylus. The scratching sound is soft, but precise bureaucracy distilled into motion. Historians still argue about the exact rate of taxation imposed on salt and gold. Some suggest it was a fixed percentage, while others believe it varied depending on political conditions and regional agreements. What seems clear is that the system functioned efficiently enough to sustain imperial administration and monumental projects. One quirky detail you overhear: certain merchants prefer to overestimate their load slightly when reporting, just to avoid the embarrassment of being caught short later. Whether this is widespread practice or merely a defensive rumor is unclear, but it speaks to the delicate dance between trader and state. A camel snorts as a collector passes, perhaps unimpressed by fiscal policy. You drift closer to observe the exchange. The tax is not collected in coin alone. It may be paid in gold dust, in salt slabs, or in other goods depending on circumstances. The flexibility reflects a mixed economy. A merchant pours a small portion of gold dust into the collector's scale. The beam dips, steadies. The amount is recorded. There is no visible resentment, only acceptance. The state provides certain guarantees security along trade routes, political stability, recognition of contracts. In return, it claims a share. Whether every trader feels this arrangement is equitable remains a question lost to time. Historians still debate how centralized Mali-esque governance truly was, and how directly the Mansa-esque authority extended into daily commercial life. But here in Timbuktu, the imperial presence feels real, tangible, in the scratch of stylus on wood. Another collector moves toward a stall selling textiles imported from North Africa. He inquires about their origin, Fez perhaps, or Tunis. Imported goods may carry different duties. The trader responds with practiced ease, presenting documentation written in Arabic script. Literacy again proves its value. You notice how carefully the collectors maintain composure. They do not rush, they do not linger unnecessarily. Their neutrality is almost theatrical. A raised voice would disrupt the market's equilibrium. Nearby, a younger merchant whispers to his companion that last season's caravan was delayed by unrest near a desert oasis, reducing profits. The tax, however, remained consistent. His tone carries mild frustration, yet he shrugs. Trade always carries risk. The collectors finish with the salt stacks and move on. One pauses briefly to adjust his sandal strap. Even empire has practical inconveniences. You glance toward the diminishing towers of pale slabs. A few pieces have been set aside, likely earmarked for duty. Salt, once mined from a barren desert pit, now contributes to sustaining an empire that spans vast territories across West Africa. It strikes you that governance here is not an abstract concept. It is present in these quiet visits, in measured portions of gold dust, in the orderly recording of numbers. No grand proclamations are needed. The collector's figures disappear gradually into the next cluster of stalls. Conversations swell again behind them, like water closing over a stone dropped into a pond. The market resumes its rhythm, and somewhere beyond this square, the mansa's treasury grows a little heavier. As the tax collectors fade back into the fabric of the market, their quiet efficiency lingers in your thoughts. You find yourself thinking not just of ledgers and scales, but of the figure whose authority stretches invisibly over all of this, the mansa. Even here, amid goats and grain and salt dust clinging to your sandals, the legacy of Mansa Musa hovers like a distant but steady star. His reign in the early 14th century marked the Mali Empire's height of wealth and influence. Mainstream historians widely recognize him as one of the richest individuals in history, largely due to Mali's control of gold production and trans-Saharan trade routes. You overhear to merchants debating the famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. One claims that Musa traveled with thousands of attendants and camels laden with gold, distributing so much in Cairo that local markets struggled with inflation afterward. The other nods, though he raises an eyebrow at the scale of the numbers. Historians still argue whether medieval chroniclers exaggerated the quantity of gold Musa distributed, but there is little doubt that his journey left a profound impression across North Africa and the Middle East. You imagine that caravan far grander than the salt trains you watched this morning, stretching across the desert with banners fluttering, scholars and officials in tow. It must have looked like a moving city. Back in Timbuktu, Musa's legacy is not just wealth, but scholarship. It was during and after his reign that the city grew as a center of Islamic learning. He is said to have commissioned mosques and encouraged the development of educational institutions, while Timbuktu's full intellectual bloom would peak later under the Songhai Empire. Its foundations were strengthened during Mali's rule. A scribe nearby scratches notes into parchment, perhaps recording a contract or copying a religious text. You pause to watch the steady motion of his reed pen. Ink glistens briefly before drying into permanence. Trade and learning sit side by side here, inseparable. One merchant tells a story half serious, half amused about how Musa's generosity in Cairo was so extravagant that gold temporarily lost some of its value there. Whether the economic impact was truly that dramatic remains debated, but the narrative persists as a symbol of abundance. The man laughs softly. Imagine giving away so much gold that people grow tired of it, he says. You picture modern headlines trying to process that. You glance again at the gold dust being weighed in small, careful portions across the square. It feels humble compared to the grand pilgrimage tale. Yet perhaps this is where real wealth lives not in spectacle, but in daily exchange. A quirky rumor drifts through conversation. Some say Musa brought back architects and scholars from his pilgrimage, shaping Timbuktu's skyline with new influences. While there is evidence that North African architectural styles influenced West African mosques, historians still debate the extent to which specific individuals were imported versus local traditions evolving organically. You walk toward the edge of the market, where mud brick structures rise beyond the stalls. Their walls are thick, sculpted by hand, studded with wooden beams that protrude like ribs. These beams serve practical purposes, scaffolding for repairs, but they also give the buildings a distinctive rhythm. Architecture here is adapted to climate. Thick walls buffer heat, flat roofs capture evening breezes. The marketplace hum continues uninterrupted beneath this architectural canopy of empire. Musa may be absent in body, having died decades earlier, but his policies ripple through every transaction. Control of goldfields, regulation of trade routes, diplomatic relationships with North Africa of it shapes this moment. Historians still argue how centralized Mali truly was, whether regional governors wielded significant autonomy or whether imperial control remained tight. Yet from where you stand, watching tax collectors record duties and scribes draft agreements, the sense of organized authority is unmistakable. A man beside you adjusts his turban and remarks that wealth is like salt, valuable only if it moves. If you bury it, he says, it feeds no one. You smile at the metaphor. Gold hidden underground is inert. Salt left in the mine is useless. Trade animates both. The sun has shifted slightly westward now, though the heat remains steady. Shadows lengthen just enough to soften edges. The market's rhythm steadies again after the tax visit, like a heartbeat returning to normal after a brief pause. You realize that this single day in Timbuktu is not isolated. It is part of a larger narrative of pilgrimage and policy, of scholarship and salt slabs, of emperors whose names echo long after their footsteps fade. And here you are, standing quietly within that echo. The afternoon light shifts from white-hot to something slightly more forgiving, and you find your feet carrying you toward a quieter quarter just beyond the densest clusters of stalls. The market's hum does not disappear, but it thins. Like fabric stretched more loosely across a frame, here, commerce brushes gently against scholarship. A low mud brick building stands with wooden beams jutting from its walls in rhythmic lines. Near its entrance, a small group of men sits cross-legged on woven mats, parchments spread before them. Their voices rise and fall in measured recitation. You recognize Arabic phrases carried on warm air. Timbuktu, even in the 14th century, is growing into a center of Islamic learning. Mainstream historians confirm that the city would later become famous for its manuscript collections and institutions such as Sankibur. While its scholarly golden age would peak somewhat later, The foundations are already visible. Trade wealth funds, intellectual life, intellectual prestige, in turn, attracts more travelers and more trade. You settle at the edge of the group, careful not to intrude. A teacher guides his students through a passage, tapping lightly on the parchment with a reed pen. The ink is dark and deliberate. Each letter is shaped with patience. No rush, no smudging. In a world where memory is treasured, writing becomes both reinforcement and expansion. Historians still argue about the exact scale of Timbuktu's educational institutions. During the Mali period, whether they functioned as formal universities in the modern sense or as decentralized networks of scholars teaching in mosques and homes. The distinction matters to modern academics, but here on the mat, the effect feels the same. Knowledge circulating alongside goods. A young student glances toward the market as a camel bell jingles faintly in the distance. For a moment, salt and scripture share his attention. You can't blame him. It is difficult to focus on grammar when entire caravans pass by. One scholar rises and walks toward the market edge, greeting a merchant with familiarity. They exchange news about caravan routes, about a manuscript requested from Cairo, about the availability of paper. Paper itself is a traded commodity, often imported from North Africa. Without trade, scholarship here would be constrained by materials. A quirky tidbit emerges in conversation. Some merchants commission copies of religious texts, not purely for study, but as symbols of status. Owning manuscripts signals piety and education. Whether every owner reads every page is another matter entirely. The idea of decorative book ownership is apparently not a modern invention. You notice how naturally gold underwrites this intellectual culture. Wealth from gold and salt trade funds, mosque construction, attracts jurists, supports teachers. The market and the madrasa are not rivals. They are partners. A man carrying a small bundle of parchment approaches a scholar, unwrapping it carefully. Inside lies a partially completed manuscript. The scholar inspects it, nodding approvingly. Payment is discussed quietly, perhaps in gold dust, perhaps in future favor. Knowledge, too, has a price. Historians still debate how literacy rates varied across Timbuktu's population. Clearly, not everyone here reads Arabic fluently. Oral tradition remains strong, as you witnessed with the Grayat earlier. But written scholarship adds another layer to the city's identity, one that distinguishes it from purely commercial hubs. You glance back toward the salt stacks visible beyond the open space. Their pale surfaces catch the afternoon sun. It strikes you that while salt preserves food, manuscripts preserve ideas. Both resist decay in their own way. A teacher gestures for his students to repeat a line, their voices blend, slightly uneven but earnest. The rhythm feels almost like breathing inhale. The market's murmur forms a background hum, a reminder that intellectual life here is embedded within daily survival. A merchant stops by briefly, offering a small pouch of dates to the scholars. Hospitality crosses occupational boundaries. One scholar thanks him warmly, then returns to his text. There is no rigid separation between sacred and secular. Both unfold within walking distance. The sun dips slightly lower, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. A breeze stirs parchment edges. For a moment, the world feels balanced, salt and gold measured carefully in one corner, words measured carefully in another. Historians still argue about the full extent of Timbuktu's manuscript tradition. How many texts were produced? How widely they circulated? But the presence of these students and teachers leaves little doubt that learning here is real and valued. You rise quietly, dust clinging to your hem. Behind you, the scholars continue reciting. Ahead, the market continues trading. And in between, Timbuktu becomes something more than a marketplace. It becomes memory written down. You drift back toward the thicker weave of the marketplace, where commerce presses closer again, and the air carries a faint shimmer from cooking fires newly kindled for the late afternoon meal. Hunger has begun its polite knocking in your stomach, and you are not alone. Traders who have spent the day weighing salt and debating exchange rates now turn their attention to more immediate calculations. How much millet porridge equals contentment? Near a cluster of woven mats, women squat beside clay pots balanced over low flames. The scent is earthy and comforting. Millet thickened into tea, perhaps, or rice if one is fortunate. Mainstream historians confirm that millet and sorghum were staple grains across the Sahel. Hardy enough to survive the region's demanding climate, You watch as one woman stirs steadily with a wooden paddle, her movements unhurried, practiced over years. A boy fans the fire with a bundle of reeds, sending sparks upward. You instinctively lean back, deciding that historical immersion does not require singed eyebrows. One light joke forms in your mind. You came for salt markets, not surprise eyebrow removal. Beside the porridge, a smaller pot simmers with sauce perhaps made from baobab leaves. Okra, or dried fish carried inland from river settlements. Trade influences diet here as well. Salt preserves fish for long journeys, allowing inland communities to taste distant waters. You realize that even this humble bowl contains geography. A man breaks a kola nut and offers pieces to nearby companions. Kola nuts, mildly stimulating, are widely traded across West Africa. They serve both social and practical purposes, keeping traders alert during long negotiations or caravan travel. You accept a small piece. It is bitter at first, then faintly sweet. You resist the urge to check if medieval caffeine counts toward your daily allowance. Historians still argue about the exact volume of food imports into cities like Timbuktu during Mali's height. Was the city largely self-sustaining through nearby agriculture along the Niger River, or heavily dependent on trade networks? The truth likely lies somewhere between river floodplains supported cultivation, but caravans supplemented variety. A quirky rumor circulates among a few merchants nearby. Some claim that certain cooks can predict the next day's trade fortunes by how evenly their porridge thickens. If it forms smooth, glossy peaks, business will be brisk. If it clumps stubbornly, expect stubborn customers. You suspect the porridge is less prophetic than the gossip, but the story persists. You sit on a woven mat, bowl warming your hands. Around you, conversation loosens. Salt prices are discussed less urgently now. A goldsmith laughs softly at something a leather worker says. For a moment, hierarchy softens in the presence of shared food. The social fabric of the market becomes more visible in these pauses. Women play a vital role in local commerce, especially in food production and small-scale trade. While long-distance caravan leadership is often male-dominated in the historical record, market life depends on a broader range of participants. Historians still debate the precise scope of women's economic autonomy in the Mali Empire, but evidence suggests they were active in trade and property ownership in various regions. A small child toddles dangerously close to a stack of salt slabs, and you tense instinctively, imagining a domino effect of mineral catastrophe. Fortunately, a quick-handed elder redirects the child before any avalanche occurs. Salt, you reflect, is heavy both, literally and economically. A traveling merchant unwraps a small parcel revealing dried dates from North Africa. Their sweetness contrasts sharply with the earthy porridge. Trade routes tie this bowl in your hands to distant oases and desert wells. You chew thoughtfully, tasting both the Niger soil and Saharan sands. A group nearby debates the merits of camel milk versus cow milk. The camel advocates argue for endurance and desert resilience. The cow supporters insist on flavor and familiarity. The debate remains unresolved, much like many scholarly arguments centuries later. As you finish your bowl, the market resumes its hum at a slightly slower tempo. Evening trade approaches when final bargains are struck before darkness settles. Fires crackle gently. Smoke curls upward in lazy spirals. You realize that food here is not merely sustenance, but stabilization. Trade may bring wealth, but shared meals maintain community. The salt you watched wade this morning will season dinners across vast distances. The gold dust exchanged will fund future caravans and, perhaps, more manuscripts. You rise, brushing grain dust from your hands. The sun lowers another degree, shadows lengthening across the packed earth. Conversations taper from negotiation to storytelling. In this gentle in-between hour, the market breathes. And you breathe with it. The afternoon stretches lazily now, and with hunger quieted and shadows growing longer, the market slips into a softer rhythm. You wander toward a shaded awning where older traders sit cross-legged on layered mats, their robes loose, their conversations slower than the bargaining you heard this morning. If the salt slabs are the market's bones, these men and women are its memory. A griot's voice drifts back into earshot, low and melodic, weaving between fact and poetry with effortless confidence. He recounts the lineage of Mali's rulers, tracing authority from Sundiata Keita onward. Mainstream historians confirm that Sundiata, the 13th century founder of the Mali Empire, established its early dominance after defeating the Soso king Sumaro Kante at the Battle of Kirina. Yet much of what we know about him comes from oral epics preserved by griots. You sit listening as the storyteller's hands move expressively, palms opening like pages. The Epic of Sundiata blends verifiable events with supernatural flourishes buffalo women, prophetic hunters, destinies foretold. Historians still argue where myth ends and political memory begins. But here, accuracy is less clinical and more communal. The story's purpose is cohesion. A salt trader beside you nods along, even correcting a minor genealogical detail under his breath. The griot glances his way, adjusts seamlessly, and continues. Oral tradition here is interactive, adaptive. It breathes. A quirky aside surfaces. Some travelers claim that certain griots can recite family histories so precisely that they can settle inheritance disputes on the spot. Whether every claim withstands scrutiny is uncertain, but their reputations are formidable. You briefly consider what it would be like to have your entire family tree publicly recited at market. Probably best to behave yourself. Nearby, a young apprentice polishes a small kora, its gored body reflecting soft light. Music accompanies narrative, reinforcing rhythm and memory. The plucked notes shimmer lightly over the hum of trade, not overpowering, but persistent. You notice how storytelling here functions almost like currency. News travels along trade routes. Yes, but so do songs and epics. A caravan arriving from the north might carry not only salt, but fresh verses, fresh anecdotes, fresh political developments. Timbuktu is not merely a point on a map, it is a node in a living network of information. Historians still debate how far Mali, as political authority extended into the desert fringes, versus relying on negotiated alliances with Tuareg and Berber groups. The lines between empire and partnership blur across shifting sands. Yet stories help maintain cohesion across distance, reinforcing shared identity. A merchant leans toward you and whispers that some rival markets exaggerate their own importance in their songs. They make themselves sound like the center of the world, he says with a sly grin. You glance around Timbuktu's bustling square and think, bold claim, but not entirely unfounded. The griot shifts into a tale about a caravan that once vanished into a sandstorm, only to reappear weeks later with unexpected riches. The moral revolves around patience and divine favor. Whether the event occurred precisely as told remains uncertain. Historians still argue how often such dramatic episodes actually happened versus serving as cautionary metaphors. But the listeners lean in regardless. As the story concludes, a small collection of cowrie shells is placed before the griot in appreciation. Cowries, often used as currency across parts of West Africa, represent both payment and respect. The exchange feels natural story given, gratitude returned. The air cools incrementally. You sense the day bending toward evening. Trade has not ceased, but it has mellowed. Salt stacks cast longer shadows, their pale faces now tinted with amber light. You reflect that this marketplace is not defined solely by economics. It is defined by memory, by shared narratives that stretch backward generations. Without them, salt would be merely mineral, gold merely metal. A child tugs at the griot's robe, requesting another tale. He laughs softly, promising one at dusk. And you, sitting among traders and storytellers, realize that in Timbuktu's salt market, history is not stored in silent archives. It is sung. The light now takes on that golden, forgiving tone that makes even stacks of salt look almost poetic. The heat loosens its grip, and the marketplace seems to exhale, as if it, too, has been standing all day and is finally allowed to sit down. You wander toward the animal enclosures at the market's edge, where the true engines of trans-Saharan trade chew thoughtfully on sparse feed. Camels kneel in patient rows, their long lashes blinking against drifting dust. Mainstream historians consistently emphasize the camel's transformative role in Saharan trade. Without the domesticated dromedary, capable of traveling long distances with minimal water, the salt and gold exchange linking West Africa to North Africa would have been far more limited. You look at one particularly unimpressed camel and silently thank it for enabling an empire. Its jaw moves in slow, circular meditation. If there were an award for unbothered historical participant, this creature would win. A caravan leader checks leather saddlebags, tightening straps, and adjusting woven padding. The equipment is practical but carefully maintained. Salt slabs are heavy, and balance matters. You remember earlier how precisely the traders measured gold dust. Now you see that similar care governs transport. A poorly balanced load could mean exhaustion or worsen the open desert. Historians still argue about the exact routes most frequently used between Timbuktu and North African cities like Sigimasa or Cairo. The Sahara is vast, and caravan paths could shift with political conditions or water availability. But there is broad agreement that these routes formed arteries of exchange linking Sub-Saharan Africa with Mediterranean economies. A younger handler approaches with a bucket of water. The camels drink in slow intervals, conserving energy. You briefly consider how you would fare crossing hundreds of miles of desert and decide you probably wouldn't. T survived this particular historical internship. Nearby a Tuareg, trader adjusts his indigo veil, leaving only his eyes visible. The Tuareg and other Berber groups often played key roles in desert navigation and trade. Their knowledge of terrain, wells, and seasonal patterns proved indispensable. Historians still debate the precise power dynamics between Mali rulers and Tuareg groups, whether cooperation was stable, partnership, or occasionally tense negotiation. From your vantage point, the relationship looks pragmatic. Salt must move. A quirky tidbit floats through conversation. Some traders believe camels can sense distant water sources before humans detect them. Modern science might offer alternative explanations, but the reputation persists. You watch a camel lift its head slightly, nostrils flaring, as if contemplating hidden oases. Beyond the animal lines, you notice donkey carts arriving from nearer agricultural settlements. While camels dominate long-distance desert trade, smaller animals support regional movement. The supply web is layered and interconnected. The market's late-day exchanges take on a logistical focus now. Tomorrow's departures are quietly planned. Slabs of salt are reorganized into caravan-ready stacks. Leather straps are inspected for cracks. You hear a trader calculating how many days to the next reliable well. The rhythm here contrasts with the earlier scholarly recitations and storytelling. This is forward-looking energy anticipation rather than reflection. You feel it in the subtle urgency of preparations. Historians still argue about the scale of annual caravan traffic during Mali's height. Some accounts describe massive caravans with thousands of camels. Others suggest more modest, frequent journeys. Medieval chroniclers often favored dramatic numbers. Standing here, you suspect reality falls somewhere between epic poetry and cautious logistics. A handler pats his camel's neck affectionately. The animal groans softly, perhaps in gratitude, perhaps in complaint. It is hard to tell. You imagine the camel's internal monologue. Yes, yes, I will carry your salt again. But I expect better snacks next time. The sun dips lower, and long shadows stretch like dark rivers across the sand. Bells tied to a few animals chime faintly as they shift their weight. The sound echoes gently across the market's edge. You realize that while salt slabs symbolize wealth here, these animals are the invisible infrastructure sustaining it. Without their endurance, Timbuktu would shrink into a regional town rather than a crossroads of continents. A breeze cools your face. The sky edges toward copper and rose. The camels kneel, chew, and wait. And tomorrow, they will carry this day's careful measurements far beyond the horizon. The sky begins its slow transformation, blue softening into amber, amber deepening toward copper. The market does not close abruptly. It unwinds. You feel it in the way voices lower, in the way transactions become final rather than exploratory. This is the hour of last bargains, the delicate dance between fair price and fine. Take it. You wander back toward the salt stacks, where a small knot of traders hovers in quiet negotiation. A buyer runs his hand along the edge of a slab, testing its solidity. Salt from the Sahara, especially from mines like Togazia's, prized for its density and purity. Mainstream historians confirm that Tagaza functioned as one of the major salt mining centers feeding Mali's markets. Though conditions there were famously harsh, with buildings constructed largely from salt blocks themselves. You imagine living in a house made of the very commodity you export. It feels poetic, though perhaps not ideal during heavy rain. The buyer squints, tilts his head, and proposes a final measure of gold dust. The seller considers, then counters with a subtle increase. The dance is slow, almost meditative. No raised voices, no theatrical outrage, just careful calibration. Historians still argue about how standardized weights and measures truly were across Mali's markets. While evidence suggests the use of scales and standardized gold weights, regional variation likely existed. Watching this exchange, you see both structure and flexibility rules guiding behavior, but room for human interpretation. A small crowd gathers, not intrusive, but attentive. Negotiation here is a kind of performance art. If you agree too quickly, you appear inexperienced. If you resist too long, you risk losing the deal. You silently thank modern fixed-price labels, even if they lack the drama. A quirky aside comes from an older trader who claims he can judge a slab's quality simply by tapping it with his knuckle. He demonstrates with a soft rap. The sound is dull but firm. Whether his assessment is scientific or theatrical, it earns nods of respect. Beyond the salt, a goldsmith concludes his own transaction, tying a small leather pouch securely. Gold dust is often carried in such pouches, carefully guarded. Because gold and moly typically circulated as dust rather than minted coinage, scales remain central to trust. Every exchange hinges on balance literally. The call to prayer drifts softly across the market as evening settles. Some traders pause, stepping aside to wash and pray. Islam plays a significant role in the empire's ruling class in urban centers, though rural populations maintain a mix of spiritual traditions. Historians still debate the extent to which Islamic practices fully penetrated rural Mali during this period, but in Timbuktu's commercial heart, the influence is visible. You notice how seamlessly spiritual rhythm overlays economic rhythm. Prayer, trade, storytelling all coexist without conflict. The market is not disrupted. It simply breathes around the pause. The final salt negotiation concludes with a nod and a firm clasp of hands. Gold dust changes possession. The slab is marked subtly, indicating its new owner. No receipt prints, no digital confirmation buzzes in a pocket. Just memory, witnesses, and reputation. Reputation, you realize, might be the strongest currency here. A dishonest trader would find himself quietly excluded. Word would travel faster than any camel. In a networked world, just without WIF trust sustains commerce. The sun dips further, brushing the horizon. Salt slabs glow faintly pink before dimming. A child attempts to lift a smaller fragment of salt and nearly tips over backward. Laughter ripples gently through the group. Even empires allow for clumsy moments. Historians still argue about how climate fluctuations during the medieval period may have affected trade intensity, whether drought cycles altered caravan frequency or agricultural output. Standing here in the cooling air, you sense how dependent everything is on balance. Water, weight, weather, will. The marketplace thins. Animals are led toward resting places. Pouches are tucked securely into robes. Fires burn lower. You linger a moment longer, watching the last exchange settle into memory. The day's salt has changed hands, and with it, so has the quiet pulse of empire. Twilight drapes itself gently across Timbuktu, and the market so lively hours ago now settles into a slower cadence. The heat has finally loosened its hold, replaced by a dry coolness that brushes your skin like relief itself. You remain near the salt stacks, watching as traders secure what remains unsold beneath woven coverings. Oil lamps flicker to life one by one. Their light is small but determined, glowing amber against mud brick walls. Shadows lengthen and overlap, turning familiar faces into softer silhouettes. The market is not finished. It has simply shifted into evening mode. You notice a group of men seated in a circle near a low table, their posture attentive. A leather pouch sits at the center. Gold dust is poured carefully onto a shallow-scaled pan. Even in dim light, transactions continue just more deliberately. Mainstream historians note that gold from the Mali Empire was a significant source of wealth for Mediterranean economies, particularly during the 14th century. Much of Europe's gold supply traced back directly or indirectly to West African mines. And here you are, watching the source, measured grain by grain. The scale tips slightly. A counterweight is added. Silence settles as both parties observe the balance. Historians still argue about the precise locations and output levels of Mali. S. Goldfield's Bambouk and Bure are often cited, but written sources from the period remain limited. What is clear, though, is that control over gold production gave Mali extraordinary leverage in long-distance trade. A quiet agreement is reached. The gold dust is swept back into its pouch with reverence. You can help thinking that this entire empire hums along on what looks like glitter in a very serious sandpit. Nearby, a storyteller resumes his gentle narrative from earlier. His voice now competes only with the occasional camel grunt and the faint rustle of cloth. He recounts a tale of a caravan guided by stars alone. The North Star and constellations serve as navigation aids across the Sahara. Though precise star-based navigation techniques varied, the desert sky functions as both compass and calendar. A quirky tidbit drifts into the tale. Some travelers insist that desert winds carry whispers from ancient traders, warning of hidden dunes. Whether poetic metaphor or sincere belief, the idea lingers in the cool air. A woman moves between small groups, offering sweetened tea poured from a modest metal pot. Sugar, often imported, remains a valued commodity. The tea is not as elaborate as later Saharan tea rituals would become, but its warmth feels grounding. You accept a small cup. It is surprisingly strong. Apparently, medieval evenings do not believe in decaf. Historians still debate how urban Timbuktu truly was during the Mali Empire's height weather. Its population numbered in the tens of thousands or less. Medieval travel accounts sometimes inflate figures dramatically. Standing here in twilight, you sense a city alive but not overwhelming. Dense with purpose rather than sprawling chaos. The camels settle, legs folded beneath them, appearing almost carved from shadow. A handler hums softly while checking their harnesses one last time. Tomorrow, some will depart before dawn, carrying salt northward and returning with goods and stories. You feel the day's arc settling in your bones. Morning urgency, midday bustle, afternoon storytelling, evening reckoning. Each phase has unfolded with its own texture, like chapters written in light. A breeze carries the scent of dust and distant river water. The Niger flows not far from here, its seasonal floods nourishing fields that feed this city. Without that river, Timbuktu would struggle to exist. Historians still argue about how much the river's shifting channels influenced settlement patterns over centuries. But its presence remains essential. The lamps flicker more steadily now. Conversations soften further. The marketplace, once bright with sun, now glows like embers. You remain seated, watching as the last visible scale is tucked away for the night. The salt rests, the gold is secured, and the empire hums quietly in the dark. Night settles fully now, not abruptly, but like a slow curtain drawn across the sky. The last streaks of copper fade into deep indigo, and above you the desert stars emerge with startling clarity. Without modern lights to compete, the heavens feel almost crowded. You tilt your head back and understand immediately why caravans trusted these patterns. The market square has thinned, but not emptied. Small clusters of traders remain, seated around low lamps, their faces lit from below in warm halos. Conversations have shifted from numbers to narratives. With the urgency of commerce concluded, reflection takes its place. You sit near a group discussing the routes northward. One man traces invisible lines in the dust with his finger, mapping wells and dunes from memory. Mainstream historians confirm that trans-Saharan caravans relied heavily on established well networks, some spaced days apart. Missing one could mean serious danger. The mental geography required is extraordinary. Historians still argue about how these routes were first systematized, whether by gradual accumulation of Berber knowledge over centuries or through more coordinated trade expansion during early Islamic periods. Either way, by the time of the Mali Empire, these pathways were sophisticated and deeply embedded in economic life. A younger trader asks about storms. An elder responds calmly, describing how wind shifts signal approaching sand squalls. He gestures toward the sky as if consulting an old friend. You realize that knowledge here is not abstract, it is survival. Someone passes around a bowl of roasted grains. You take a small handful, crunching thoughtfully. The simplicity of the snack contrasts with the complexity of the trade networks discussed. It strikes you that empires may rise on gold, but they endure on practical wisdom, like remembering where the next well lies. A quirky belief surfaces in the discussion. Some caravaneers insist that certain dunes move in predictable personalities, almost like stubborn neighbors. That one there, a man says, pointing vaguely northward, always shifts left after the second wind. You resist the urge to imagine dunes holding grudges. Across the square, a quiet exchange takes place between two figures you recognize from earlier negotiations. Reputation is being reinforced. A promise for future trade is made, sealed not with paperwork, but with eye contact and a clasp of hands. Trust here functions as contract law. Historians still debate the internal political stability of the Mali Empire during its later 14th century years, whether succession disputes weakened centralized authority sooner than often assumed. Yet standing in this calm marketplace, you sense cohesion rather than fragility. Perhaps cracks exist at higher levels of power, but daily life continues steadily. The camels shift occasionally, bells giving soft, irregular chimes. The sound blends with distant murmurs and the low hiss of oil lamps. It is a lullaby of logistics. You glance upward again. The Milky Way stretches overhead in a pale river of light. Caravans would depart, guided by this same sky, carrying salt to distant markets and returning with textiles, books, horses, and ideas. Timbuktu sits at the center of these exchanges, not isolated but profoundly connected. A man beside you speaks quietly about his father's first caravan journey, decades ago. He describes the nervous anticipation, the endless horizon, the moment when the first distant palm trees signaled an oasis. You can hear pride and relief woven together. Mainstream historians often emphasize Mali's wealth in terms of gold output and trade volume. Yet here, wealth also feels like continuity knowledge passed from elder to youth, roots memorized, rituals repeated. The lamps burn lower, one by one. Small flames are pinched out, plunging sections of the square into darkness. The market does not vanish, it simply sleeps. You remain seated a moment longer, absorbing the layered quiet, starshine above, cooling sand below, the steady breathing of animals nearby. Tomorrow at dawn, salt will once again be measured, gold weighed, stories exchanged. But for now, the Mali Empire rests under a sky so clear it feels almost infinite. And you rest with it? The night deepens, but you do not leave just yet. Instead, you wander slowly toward the edge of the square where the packed earth gives way to softer sand. The market behind you has grown quiet only. The faint murmur of a final conversation and the low rumble of a camel disturb the stillness. Overhead, the stars burn brighter, sharp as grains of salt scattered across velvet. You walk toward a slightly elevated rise just beyond the market's edge. From here, Timbuktu spreads out in muted shapes, low mud brick structures, flat roofs, wooden beams protruding like ribs against the sky. No towering skyline, no glittering palaces. And yet, this modest silhouette anchors one of the most important trade networks of the medieval world. Mainstream historians consistently note that Timbuktu's significance derived less from monumental architecture and more from its strategic position, near the Niger River and trans-Saharan routes. Geography, not grandeur, built its reputation. You stand there, considering how often history favors spectacle over placement. Behind you, a final lamp flickers out. The Niger River lies not far to the south, its waters invisible in darkness, but quietly shaping everything. Seasonal floods nourish agriculture, enabling surplus grain that feeds traders and scholars alike. Historians still argue about how much river channel shifts affected the city's prosperity over centuries, some suggesting environmental changes played a role in later decline. But tonight, the river flows steady, unseen, but essential. A soft wind brushes across the dunes, carrying with it the faint mineral scent of salt and the earthy undertone of river mud. It feels almost like the land itself breathing. You notice a pair of figures seated nearby on the sand, speaking in hushed tones. Their silhouettes suggest youth, perhaps apprentices, preparing for their first caravan journey. One gestures animatedly toward the stars, likely tracing tomorrow's route in the sky. The other listens, nodding. The future of trade rests not only on gold reserves, but on steady hands and memorized constellations. A quirky rumor drifts from their conversation. Some caravaneers swear that if you whisper your destination to the wind before departure, the desert will guide you safely. It sounds like superstition, yet in a landscape this vast, small rituals provide comfort. You sink down onto the sand, feeling its residual warmth from the day's heat. The silence is not empty. It hums faintly with distant breathing, shifting animals, the almost inaudible rustle of cloth. Historians still debate the exact population size of Timbuktu at its height under Mali's rule. Medieval accounts by travelers like Ibn Battuta describe a prosperous city with judges and merchants, yet numbers vary widely. It is one of those historical questions that resists precise measurement like gold dust slipping. slightly in a scale S-pan. You reflect on the full arc of the day you have just witnessed. Morning caravans arriving with salt slabs carved from distant Saharan mines. Midday bargaining measured in gold, dust, and reputation. Afternoon meals of millet and cola shared beneath woven shade. Scholars reciting verses, while traders calculated margins. Camels kneeling patiently at twilight. Stories sung into the night. The Mali Empire, at its height in the 14th century, was one of the largest and wealthiest states in Africa. That is the broad historical fact repeated in textbooks. But here, wealth does not look like treasure chests or glittering crowns. It looks like balance between desert and river, trade and scholarship, story and scale. You brush a bit of sand from your sleeve and glance back toward the now sleeping marketplace. The salt stacks sit silent, pale shapes against darkness. Tomorrow they will gleam again under the sun, ready for measurement, ready for movement. For now, the city rests, and you sit quietly in the warm sand under a sky so vast it feels almost protective. Knowing that in a few short hours, the rhythm will begin again. The night air cools further, and you eventually rise from the sand, brushing your palms together softly. The marketplace may be resting, but the city beyond it still breathes in smaller, quieter ways. You drift toward the residential quarter, where low mud brick homes cluster together like sleeping animals. A faint glow escapes through doorways and small window openings. Inside, families finish their evening routines. You hear the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of pottery, the low hum of a lullaby. Trade wealth filters into domestic life, not through spectacle, but through subtle comforts extra grain stored, sturdier walls maintained, perhaps a small imported textile folded carefully at the foot of a sleeping mat. Mainstream historians emphasize that Mali's prosperity during the 14th century supported urban growth in centers like Timbuktu and Gao, while rural communities remained essential to the empire's agricultural backbone. Cities developed distinct rhythms shaped by commerce and Islamic scholarship. You see that duality, here market energy by day, family intimacy by night. A woman steps outside briefly, adjusting a clay water jar near her doorway. She glances toward the stars, perhaps gauging the hour. Time here is measured by sky and habit rather than mechanical clocks. Historians still argue about how precisely daily schedules were structured in medieval. West African cities' weather prayer times served as the primary anchors for urban routine. Likely so, especially in trading hubs influenced by Islamic practice. You pass a small courtyard where children lie on woven mats, already half asleep. An elder recounts a gentle tale, nothing grand like Sundiata's epic, just a small moral story about a clever hare outwitting a larger animal. Oral storytelling does not pause when the market closes, it simply softens. A quirky domestic belief reaches your ears. Some households sprinkle a thin line of salt at the threshold to discourage unwanted spirits. Whether widely practiced or not, the idea feels fitting in a city where salt is both commodity and symbol. You resist the urge to check if they offer a bulk discount for supernatural protection. Further along, you notice a modest home with a slightly larger courtyard, a merchant of some standing perhaps. His camels rest in a small enclosure nearby. Wealth here expresses itself through scale and security rather than ostentation. Thick walls, reinforced doors, additional storage jars. Practical prosperity. Historians still debate the exact social stratification within Mali. Urban centers how rigid class distinctions were between nobles, merchants, artisans, and enslaved individuals. Written records are limited, and oral histories emphasize unity over hierarchy. Yet differences in dwelling size and resources hint at layered status. A soft breeze carries the scent of river water again. The Niger's presence remains a quiet constant. Without it, agriculture falters. Without agriculture, the market falters. Even the grandest gold transaction depends on steady millet harvests somewhere upstream. You pause near a small well where two late risers draw water under lamplight. Their laughter is hushed but genuine. Daily life continues in micro-movements long after official commerce ceases. In the distance, you hear a camel snort softly. Even the great desert carriers seem subdued tonight. You reflect on how interconnected everything feels. Salt mined from the Sahara, gold extracted from forested regions to the south, grain grown along the river, manuscripts copied in shaded courtyards, stories told in twilight, families sleeping beneath mud brick roofs. The Mali Empire is not a single glittering point, but a web of quiet dependencies. Historians still argue about how quickly the empire as centralized authority weakened after the reign of powerful manses. Yet from the perspective of this night, stability feels tangible. Lamps glow steadily, doors close securely. Children drift into dreams without fear of sudden disruption. You reach the edge of the residential quarter and turn back toward the marketplace, now barely visible in darkness. Tomorrow, it will awaken as if nothing ever paused. For now, the city rests in layered trades suspended, stories softened, salts stacked in patient silence, and you continue walking gently through the warm Saharan night. The night deepens into that velvety stretch where even whispers feel amplified. You find yourself circling back toward the market's edge, drawn by the faint glow of a single remaining lamp. A lone figure sits beside an older merchant, perhaps unable or unwilling to surrender fully to sleep just yet. He is sorting something small and granular into neat little piles on a cloth. As you draw closer, you see it is gold dust carefully separated, perhaps recalculated after the day's trades. Even in near darkness, the particles catch lamplight with a subdued shimmer. Mainstream historians emphasize that Mali's gold was so abundant during the 14th century that rulers restricted its circulation in nugget form, reserving larger pieces for the mansa while allowing gold dust to circulate more widely. This practice helped central authority maintain control over wealth concentration. Watching the merchant portion out dust grain by grain, you sense how that policy would shape daily commerce. He notices you observing and gives a small nod, continuing his work. Each pile is measured against a set of small brass weights. The scale dips and steadies. There is something almost meditative about the repetition. Historians still argue whether Mali's rulers exercised direct control over gold mines or whether local communities maintained significant autonomy while paying tribute. The sources are fragmentary, filtered through Arabic chroniclers. Writing from afar, but here, in this lamplit sorting ritual, the reality feels both centralized and personal empire flowing through individual hands. A quirky detail slips into your thoughts. Some traders reportedly stored tiny amounts of gold dust in hollowed walking sticks or concealed pouches sewn discreetly into garments. Security in a cash-based economy requires creativity. You glance at your own sleeves, suddenly feeling under. The merchant pauses, rubbing his fingers together to dislodge clinging particles. Gold is stubborn, like that reluctant to release its grip. He carefully funnels each measured portion into a small leather pouch, tying it with deliberate knots. Beyond him, the square lies almost entirely dark. Salt stacks rest beneath coverings. Camels kneel, their outlines barely visible against the starlit sand. The earlier bustle feels like a distant echo. You sit a short distance away, giving the merchant his space while absorbing the quiet precision of his task. This is the invisible labor behind empire, the recalculation, the balancing of accounts, the private reassurance that today's exchanges align. Historians still debate the degree to which Mali's economy operated on credit versus immediate exchange. Some evidence suggests merchants extended trust-based credit arrangements across distances, particularly among established partners. If so, much of this sorting might represent future obligations as much as present wealth. A breeze nudges the lamp flame sideways, and for a moment, the gold dust flickers brighter, then dims. The merchant shields it gently with his palm. You can't help thinking how fragile illumination is both literal and metaphorical. In the distance, a dog barks once and falls silent. The sound ripples briefly, then dissolves into the night. The merchant finally finishes, gathering the cloth's edges and securing the pouches within his robe. He extinguishes the lamp with a soft breath. Darkness folds inward, but the stars overhead remain unwavering. You remain seated a few moments longer, letting your eyes adjust fully to starlight. The absence of artificial glow reveals the Milky Way in astonishing detail. It feels like standing beneath a river suspended above you. Mainstream historians often focus on Mali's external influences, gold reaching Europe, its pilgrimage dazzling Cairo. Yet here, in the quiet act of counting gold dust by lamplight, you see the intimate core of that influence. Empire is not only spectacle, it is careful hands, steady scales, and a final knot tied securely before sleep. And now, even that last lamp has gone dark. A faint chill slips into the air sometime after midnight, the kind that makes the desert feel briefly tender rather than relentless. You draw your robe a little closer and wander toward the outer edge of Timbuktu, where the packed earth thins and dunes begin their quiet dominion. The city behind you is mostly still nano lamps, no murmured bargaining, just the occasional shifting of animals and the distant, steady breathing of sleepers. Out here, the boundary between city and Sahara feels almost symbolic. One step forward, and you stand in the world of endless sand. One step back, and you return to a network of trade, scholarship, and human agreement. It is astonishing how thin that line can be. Mainstream historians often describe the Sahara not as a barrier, but as a bridge in active trade corridor rather than an impassable void. This reframing challenges older narratives that imagine sub-Saharan Africa as isolated. By the time of the Mali Empire, trans-Saharan routes were centuries old, linking West Africa to North Africa and beyond. You stand at that literal threshold and feel how true that is. A low dune rises before you, smooth in the starlight. Wind has combed its surface into delicate ripples. Historians still argue about how shifting desertification patterns may have altered trade routes over centuries. Whether advancing sands forced periodic adaptation, climate, like politics, rarely stands still. You climb the dune slowly, sand sliding softly beneath your feet. At the crest, Timbuktu appears behind you as a dark silhouette, modest and grounded. Ahead stretches the vast Sahara, silvered by moonlight. The scale difference is humbling. A quirky caravan superstition drifts back into your memory. Some travelers refuse to look back at their departure city once a journey begins, believing it invites hesitation or misfortune. You glance back anyway. The city remains solid, unoffended by your curiosity. From this vantage point, you consider the salt that began its journey in distant mines like Togazamin's, so harsh that, according to some accounts, buildings there were constructed from salt blocks themselves due to scarcity of other materials. Mainstream historians confirm Tagaza's importance, though descriptions of its extremity sometimes come from external observers who may have emphasized drama. You imagine those miners cutting rectangular slabs under brutal conditions, knowing that each block will travel hundreds of miles south to markets like the one you walked through today. Salt, preserving food, seasoning meals, symbolizing wealth. Historians still debate the labor conditions in such mines whether workers were primarily enslaved individuals or free laborers compelled by circumstance. The sources offer glimpses, but not complete clarity. Standing here under the vast sky, the human cost of empire feels both distant and present. A faint breeze brushes across the dune's crest, smoothing footprints almost immediately. The desert is patient. It erases as readily as it supports. You sit at the top for a while, gazing northward. Somewhere beyond the horizon lie oases, then cities like Sigil Massa, then Mediterranean ports. Gold dust weighed earlier tonight will eventually find its way into coinage, jewelry, perhaps even European treasuries. Timbuktu's market square connects invisibly to continents far beyond your sight. And yet, from here, everything feels quiet and small. The camels below shift slightly, bells giving a single muted chime. Tomorrow at dawn, some will kneel to receive salt once more. The cycle continues: extraction, transport, exchange, return. Mainstream historians often frame the Mali Empire as one of Africa's greatest pre-colonial states, emphasizing its territorial reach and economic strength. Those are important markers, but perched on this dune, you sense something subtler: resilience. A city that thrives on negotiation between river and desert, between scarcity and abundance. You rise slowly, letting sand cascade from your hem. The city awaits behind you, still sleeping. The Sahara waits before you, endless and indifferent. For a moment, you stand suspended between them. Then you turn gently back toward Timbuktu, carrying the silence of the dunes with you. You descend the dune carefully, sand whispering beneath your steps, and re-enter the sleeping city with a softer awareness. The deeper night has that suspended quality where time feels stretched thin, almost transparent. Timbuktu lies wrapped in stillness, but beneath it runs the quiet machinery of continuity. As you walk along the outer edge of the market, you notice a small guard post, little more than a shaded alcove with a spear resting against the wall. A watchman sits there, alert despite the hour. His presence is understated but meaningful. Mainstream historians note that Mali's rulers maintained systems of governance that included appointed officials overseeing trade centers. Security along major trade routes was essential. Merchants would not risk caravans of salt and gold without reasonable assurances of safety. The empire's stability during its height depended on that trust. The watchman shifts slightly as you approach, nodding once. He is not aggressive, not imposing, just steady. Historians still argue about the exact structure of Mali's provincial administration, how much authority governors Farbus exercised locally versus directives flowing directly from the Manza escort. But here, in this quiet guard post, imperial presence feels tangible without being overbearing. You imagine the watchman's nightly routine listening for unusual movement, ensuring no opportunistic theft disturbs the sleeping merchants. The fact that salt stacks remain undisturbed through the night suggests the system works. Reputation and law overlap. A quirky local belief drifts through your memory. Some claim that placing a small piece of salt near valuable goods discourages thieves, as salt symbolizes honesty and binding agreements. Whether symbolic or practical salt is heavy, after all, the idea lingers charmingly in the air. You continue walking, noticing how even architecture reflects defensive practicality. Thick mud brick walls insulate against heat by day and chill by night, but they also provide solidity. Wooden beams protrude from upper walls, used for maintenance scaffolding. The city's design is not ornamental, it is adaptive. Historians still debate whether Timbuktu's rise owed more to deliberate imperial planning or organic growth fueled by trade convergence. Likely a mixture. Geography provided opportunity. Governance provided structure. Merchants provided momentum. You pass a small mosque courtyard where a few early risers already stir. Though dawn is still distant, some prepare for the pre-dawn prayer. Religious rhythm anchors the day before commerce resumes. Islam's influence among Mali's urban elite is well documented. Though rural regions maintained layered spiritual traditions, a man washes his hands and face quietly from a clay basin, movements deliberate and calm. Water glints faintly under starlight. You realize how precious that resource is in this environment, drawn from wells or carried from the Niger. Without it, no city thrives. The watchman behind you clears his throat softly, perhaps to stay awake. You resist the modern urge to suggest coffee. Kola nut would be more appropriate here. The sky begins the faintest transition black, softening toward deep navy. The stars closest to the horizon fade first. It is almost imperceptible, but you feel it. Tomorrow's market waits just beyond that horizon. You think of the gold dust sorted by lamplight, the salt slabs stacked in quiet rows, the camels resting with patient endurance. The empire is not asleep in the sense of absence. It is paused, gathering breath. Historians still argue about how quickly Mali's dominance declined in the later 14th and 15th centuries, eventually giving way to the rise of the Songhai Empire. Political shifts are inevitable. But in this particular night, this single slice of time, the system feels intact, cohesive, purposeful. You pause once more at the edge of the square. The guard remains steady. The mosque courtyard grows slightly brighter as pre-dawn preparation continues. The first hint of light brushes the eastern horizon. The market will soon wake, and you, having wandered through its sleeping heart, are ready to witness its rebirth. A thin ribbon of pale light unfurls along the eastern horizon, barely noticeable at first, like a secret shared between sky and sand. The air carries that rare pre-dawn coolness, almost gentle, and you feel it settle lightly on your skin. Timbuktu begins to stir not abruptly, but in small, quiet movements that ripple outward from homes and courtyards. From the mosque courtyard you passed moments ago, the call to prayer rises low and melodic. Carried on air still untroubled by daytime heat, one by one, doors open. Figures step into the dim light, robes wrapped close, moving toward the sound. The rhythm of faith precedes the rhythm of trade. Mainstream historians consistently note the importance of Islam in Mali's urban centers, particularly among rulers and merchants. By the 14th century, Islamic scholarship and legal traditions had become woven into city life, even as older spiritual practices endured in rural regions. You watch as men and a few boys wash carefully before prayer, movements practiced and unhurried. Historians still argue about the depth of religious transformation in the broader population, whether Islam was primarily embraced by elites and traders or more widely integrated into everyday life. From your vantage point, the devotion feels sincere and steady, not performative. As prayer concludes, the city shifts once more. The market square begins to awaken. A woman sweeps sand from the entrance of her stall, drawing neat arcs that briefly imprint order onto the ground. Another adjusts woven mats. A camel handler coaxes a reluctant animal to stand, the creature groaning in protest as if personally offended by sunrise. You almost sympathize. Mornings are ambitious. Salt stacks are uncovered, their pale surfaces catching the first gold-tinted rays. They glow softly as if lit from within. The slabs appear unchanged from last night, yet the new light gives them renewed presence. A merchant retrieves his scale from storage, testing the balance with a practiced flick. Gold weights clink softly against one another. The sound is small, but definitive the marketplace, clearing its throat. A quirky ritual unfolds nearby. One trader sprinkles a few grains of salt at the edge of his stall before arranging his goods. Whether symbolic blessing or habitual superstition, he performs it without irony. In a city built on salt's value, even a pinch feels significant. Historians still debate how strictly market regulations were enforced as Donweather officials monitored opening procedures or primarily intervened during disputes. For now, the scene feels self-regulating. Traders greet one another warmly, sharing brief updates before the day accelerates. A boy runs across the square carrying a bundle of firewood, nearly colliding with a goat that has clearly decided it owns the center of the path. The goat does not move. The boy reroutes. Even empires must yield to determined livestock. The sky brightens further, shifting from silver blue to warm amber. The Niger River, though not visible from here, begins reflecting the same growing light. Its seasonal floods sustain crops that feed this very square. Mainstream historians emphasize the river's role as a lifeline agriculture supporting urban expansion and trade specialization. You feel the day resetting itself. Yesterday's transactions are complete. Today's remain unwritten. Caravans that arrived are now planning departure. Fresh traders may appear before midday. The cycle continues. Historians still argue about the precise volume of daily trade in cities like Timbuktu. Whether most transactions were small-scale local exchanges or dominated by large caravan shipments. Watching the square fill gradually, you suspect it is both grand commerce layered atop countless modest trades. A camel bell jingles brightly as the animal finally stands. Dust rises in a soft cloud. The first full ray of sunlight clears the horizon, illuminating the square in confident gold. Voices grow louder, laughter returns. The scales are ready. And just like that, the Mali Empire begins another day measured in salt, balanced in gold, sustained by river and desert alike. You stand in the growing warmth, watching rebirth unfold in quiet increments. The market is awake. The sun climbs with steady confidence, now brushing warmth across the square in widening strokes. What was moments ago a hushed reawakening becomes a gathering hum. Traders step fully into their roles again, greeting familiar faces with nods that blend friendship and business in equal measure. You move through the square as fresh goods appear, bundles unwrapped, mats unfurled, scales balanced. The salt slabs, luminous in morning light, are once again the visual anchors of the market. Their edges are chipped slightly from yesterday's handling, but their value remains firm. Mainstream historians confirm that salt was so vital in West Africa that it sometimes traded weight for weight with gold in certain regions. That fact alone feels astonishing. You imagine holding a slab of mineral and realizing it rivals precious metal in worth. It makes your own kitchen salt feel suddenly underappreciated. A trader near you recounts a recent journey south toward forested lands where gold originates. Gold from regions such as Bur and Bambouk flowed northward through networks that Mali's rulers sought to control. Historians still argue about how centralized that control truly was, whether local mining communities retained significant autonomy while paying tribute, or whether imperial oversight is more direct. As the trader gestures animatedly, you sense how layered the system must have been. He describes forest humidity, clinging to skin, so different from the dry Sahara air. His hands mimic sifting motions, as if still washing sediment for flecks of gold. The contrast between ecological zones, forest goldfields, and desert salt mines defines Mali's economic geography. A quirky aside slips into his story. He claims that certain gold panors sing specific rhythms while washing sediment, believing it encourages luck. Whether this improves yield or morale is unclear, but tradition persists. the square grows busier. A new caravan has arrived at dawn from a nearer settlement along the Niger. Donkeys carry sacks of grain and dried fish. The smell of river and smoke mingles faintly with mineral dryness. Timbuktu's market is not only trans-Saharan, it is deeply regional. Historians still debate the relative importance of riverine trade compared to desert caravans. The Niger functioned as a major artery, enabling movement of bulk goods far more efficiently than overland routes alone. Standing here, watching donkeys unload while camels kneel nearby, you see the convergence of water and sand economies in a single space. A scholar passes through the square carrying a wrapped manuscript, likely heading toward a teaching session. Trade and learning once again intersect physically. Wealth generated here supports intellectual life there. You pause beside a pair of merchants disputing a minor discrepancy in weight. The scale dips unevenly. They adjust, reweigh, and adjust again. No shouting, just careful recalibration. Trust depends on precision. A boy attempts to lift a smaller salt fragment and nearly repeats yesterday's near-topple incident. An elder steadies him with a gentle laugh. Some lessons require repetition. The sun now clears fully above the horizon. Shadows shorten. The heat begins its gradual ascent. You sense the day accelerating toward its familiar rhythm morning arrivals, leading to midday negotiations. Mainstream historians often frame Mali's strength in terms of its resource duality: gold from the south, salt from the north. That structural advantage created leverage in long-distance trade networks connecting to North Africa and beyond. But here, advantage looks like daily labor: lifting, measuring, negotiating, remembering. Historians still argue about the precise timeline of Mali's peak prosperity and when signs of fragmentation began to surface. Yet in this morning light, the system feels seamless. Caravans unload, grain sacks shift, gold dust glints softly in small pouches. You step aside as a camel, newly loaded with salt, rises awkwardly to its feet. It sways once, regains balance, and fixes you with an expression that suggests mild existential fatigue. You silently promise it that history books will appreciate its contribution. The market pulses stronger now. Another day of exchange unfolds, bright and deliberate, and you stand within it, watching empire renew itself in sunlight. The morning advances with quiet determination, and the square now hums at full strength. Voices overlap in measured crescendos. Scales clink, camels groan. Grain sacks thump against packed earth. You feel the marketplace reach its daily stride, confident and almost orchestral. You drift toward a cluster of traders engaged in a more animated discussion than most. Their gestures are sharper, their brows slightly furrowed. At the center of their circle rests a dispute not over quality, but over route access. A caravan leader claims that a particular desert well has recently been reserved by another group during peak travel days. Mainstream historians note that control of wells was crucial to trans-Saharan trade. Wells were lifelines, and access could shape routes and influence profit margins. While the Mali Empire exerted influence over major corridors, local groups, particularly Tuareg confederations, often maintained practical control over specific stretches of desert. Cooperation and negotiation were constant necessities. The caravan leader insists that restricting access disrupts long-established agreements. Another trader counters that maintenance of the well requires labor and protection, justifying temporary priority. You watch as voices rise slightly but remain controlled. No one wants escalation. Stability benefits everyone. Historians still argue about how formalized such agreements were. Were they codified under imperial decree or maintained through customary law and mutual dependence? The written record offers glimpses, but much likely operated through oral consensus and precedent. An elder steps forward, his presence enough to soften the edge of the debate. He listens carefully, then suggests a compromise. Staggered departure days, shared maintenance responsibility. The proposal hangs briefly in the air before nods ripple through the group. Agreement, tentative but genuine. You can't help admiring the efficiency. In many eras, water disputes lead to lasting hostility. Here, commerce nudges cooperation. Salt and gold demand passage. Passage demands diplomacy. A quirky aside emerges when one merchant mutters that camels themselves seem to prefer certain wells, refusing to drink elsewhere unless truly desperate. Whether camels harbor preferences or simply detect subtle mineral differences is uncertain, but the idea of desert animals with refined taste feels oddly fitting. The conversation dissolves back into practical planning. Departure schedules are adjusted. You realize how fluid the system is, routes shifting slightly like dunes, yet maintaining overall continuity. Nearby, another negotiation unfolds between a gold trader and a textile merchant from North Africa. The fabric is finely woven, dyed in deep indigo and soft ochre. Mainstream historians confirm that textiles were among the key imports into West Africa via trans-Saharan trade, alongside horses, copper, and luxury goods. The gold that leaves this square will soon be exchanged for such items across the desert. The textile merchant carefully displays the cloth's weave, emphasizing durability. The gold trader weighs his pouch thoughtfully. Historians still debate the scale of Mediterranean demand for West African gold relative to other sources, but by the 14th century, Mali's output was undeniably significant in regional economies. You notice how trust threads through each exchange. Agreements here rely on memory, reputation, and communal observation. There are no stamped contracts, yet accountability feels real. The sun climbs higher, heat begins pressing down more insistently, shadows shrink beneath stalls. You feel the day nearing its midpoint, once more mirroring yesterday's arc. A young apprentice approaches you with wide eyes, asking whether you think the well-compromise will hold. You smile and tell him that history suggests cooperation tends to prevail when everyone's survival depends on it. He nods solemnly, as if you've delivered a profound prophecy rather than common sense. Historians still argue about the long-term sustainability of such negotiated systems, whether shifting political pressures eventually strain them beyond repair. But for this moment, under this rising sun, balance is restored. A camel bell jinges as another caravan begins preparing for departure. Salt slabs are hoisted into place, straps tightened, water skins checked. The marketplace, vibrant and alive, adapts in real time. And you witness once again how empire is less about rigid control and more about constant, careful adjustment. The heat settles over the square like a slow, invisible tide. By now, the air shimmers faintly above the packed earth, and the scent of dust and salt grows sharper. Conversations continue, but with a slightly softer cadences, if everyone instinctively conserves breath beneath the sun's steady gaze. You drift toward the shaded edge of the market, where a low awning offers temporary relief. Beneath it, a group of older merchants recline on woven mats, their trading mostly done for the day. This is the hour when memory surfaces, when stories float upward as easily as dust motes in the light. One man, his beard streaked silver, gestures with a carved wooden cup and begins recounting the reign of Mansa Musa. His name alone shifts the tone slightly, even in casual retelling. Mainstream historians agree that during his rule in the early 14th century, the Mali Empire reached a peak of wealth and territorial extent. His famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 reportedly distributed so much gold in Cairo that it affected local economies for years. You imagine that journey, thousands in procession, camels laden with gold dust, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. It sounds extravagant, almost mythical. And yet multiple sources confirm its scale. The merchant chuckles and adds a local twist to the tale. He claims that when Mansa Musa passed through certain towns, children scrambled to collect stray gold flakes that fell from overloaded pouches. Whether literal or exaggerated, the image sparkles in your mind. Historians still argue whether accounts of Musa's generosity were embellished by later writers eager to dramatize West Africa's wealth. Medieval chroniclers often favored spectacle, yet even conservative estimates place Mali among the most prosperous states of its time. The conversation drifts toward Timbuktu's famed centers of learning. Another elder mentions the Sankar Mosque and its associated scholarly community. Manuscripts copied here traveled widely, and scholars from across the Islamic world visited or corresponded with West African intellectuals. You picture quiet rooms filled with parchment and ink, so different from the bright clamor of this market. Commerce funds, scholarship. Scholarship elevates prestige. Prestige reinforces trade. The cycle feels almost architectural. A quirky tidbit surfaces when one man insists that certain scholars were rumored to carry small amulets tucked into their robes, not for magic exactly, but as reminders of humility. Whether apocryphal or real, The idea of great intellect paired with simple talismans feels comforting. A caravan bell rings sharply, snapping you back to the present. Another group prepares to depart northward. The camels kneel, salt secured. Drivers adjust headscarves, checking knots with deliberate care. Departure carries its own ritual rhythm. Mainstream historians emphasize that trans-Saharan caravans could include hundreds, sometimes thousands of camels. The logistics were immense. Water calculation, route timing, coordination with desert guides. You glance at this modest cluster and imagine it multiplied many times over, stretching across dunes like a moving spine. Historians still debate how climate fluctuations over centuries may have influenced trade routes, whether shifts in rainfall patterns, altered grazing zones, or well reliability. Standing in this heat, you understand how even subtle environmental changes could ripple outward into economic consequences. A light breeze stirs, offering momentary relief. It carries a faint murmur from the river Directiona, reminder that beyond this square, the Niger flows steadily, indifferent to market schedules. You lean back against a mud brick wall, feeling its warmth seep gently through fabric. The day's transactions begin tapering off. Deals are sealed with nods, hand clasps, shared cups of water. One merchant jokes that if salt truly equals gold, perhaps he should start wearing it as jewelry. The others laugh, picturing necklaces of rectangular slabs of fashion statement that would require excellent neck strength. The humor fades into comfortable silence. You watch the last northbound caravan rise to its feet. Long shadows stretching behind it now as the sun edges toward afternoon decline. Bells chime softly as the line begins moving away, step by deliberate step, toward the horizon. Empire, you realize, is both grand narrative and ordinary persistence. The square grows quieter, heat lingers, and history continues walking, one caravan at a time. Afternoon light tilts gently westward, turning the market's edges softer, less severe. The harsh brilliance of midday fades into something warmer, almost honey-colored. The square exhales. Fewer voices now, more space between footsteps. What remains feels deliberate rather than hurried. You wander past stalls in the process of closing. Salt slabs are stacked neatly, some covered with woven mats to shield them from dew later in the night. Gold pouches are tied securely and tucked into layered garments. Grain sacks are hoisted back onto donkeys with quiet efficiency. Mainstream historians often describe the Mali Empire as a decentralized state that relied on tribute relationships and trade taxation rather than rigid bureaucratic oversight. Watching the square wind down, that description feels tangible. No imperial official hovers over each exchange. Instead, authority flows subtly through expectation and shared understanding. Near the edge of the market, a small group gathers around a traveling storyteller. His voice carries easily in the calmer air. He recounts epics of ancient heroes' names that ripple across West African oral tradition, linking Mali's present to earlier empires like Ghana Empire and Songhai Empire. These narratives blur boundaries between history and legend. Historians still argue about how much of early West African imperial history survives primarily through oral epics versus archaeological evidence. The balance between memory and material record remains an ongoing scholarly conversation. But here, in this fading light, oral tradition feels vividly alive. The storyteller gestures toward the horizon, describing the rise of kings and the fall of cities. You notice how listeners lean in not for commerce, but for continuity. Salt and gold sustain bodies. Stories sustain identity. A quirky aside slips into the performance. He claims that one legendary ruler could weigh gold merely by lifting it in his palm. The crowd chuckles knowingly. Exaggeration is part of the charm. You glance at your own hand and decide that your talents lie elsewhere perhaps, in lifting moderately heavy groceries. The sun dips lower, stretching shadows long across the square. Camels kneel for the night, legs folding with practiced grace. Their silhouettes resemble patient ships docked at a sandy harbor. Mainstream historical fact, Timbuktu, at its height in the 14th and 15th centuries, was one of the most significant urban centers in West Africa, known not only for trade, but also for Islamic scholarship. The dual identical commercial and intellectual set it apart. You recall the manuscripts discussed earlier, ink drying in cool rooms while salt baked in open air. Two worlds, side by side. Historians still debate the precise population of Timbuktu during its peak. Estimates vary widely, complicated by limited written records. Some suggest tens of thousands, others caution against overestimation. As you watch the square thin out, it's easy to imagine both bustle and quiet coexisting across neighborhoods. An elderly merchant counts remaining inventory, murmuring numbers under his breath. His grandson attempts to help but loses track halfway through and starts over. The old man smiles, patient. Trade is arithmetic. Legacy is mentorship. You pause at the well that sparked debate earlier. Its surface reflects streaks of orange sky. Water remains still, as if unaware of the day's negotiations. Tomorrow, it will serve again, impartial and essential. A final transaction unfolds quietly, a modest exchange of salt for dried fish. No spectacle, just mutual necessity. Hands clasp, goods change, owners. Balance achieved. The air cools slightly. A faint evening breeze threads through the square, carrying distant sounds from the riverbank, perhaps laughter, perhaps prayer. You feel the day folding inward, like a market ledger closing. Empire does not vanish at sunset. It rests, and you remain watching the last light settle over stacked salt, over packed earth, over a marketplace that has sustained worlds far beyond its dusty boundaries. The sky deepens toward indigo. The square grows hushed. History prepares to sleep. Evening settles with a softness that feels earned. The market square, once vibrant with barter and bells, now hums only with low murmurs and the occasional shuffle of sandals against cooling earth. Lanterns flicker to life, one by one, small golden halos against mud brick walls. You remain where you are, letting the afterglow stretch across your thoughts. The stacked salt slabs catch the lantern light differently, now less blinding, more subdued, as if they too are ready to rest. Gold is hidden away, grain secured, camels tethered in loose semicircles like quiet sentries. Mainstream historians remind us that the Mali Empire's prosperity depended on its ability to maintain these daily rhythms over decades. Trade, taxation, diplomatic alliances, control of key routes, none of it functioned without ordinary people showing up to lift, measure, negotiate. Empire, in the end, was sustained by repetition. A group of younger traders sit cross-legged nearby, replaying the day's deals in low voices. One boasts gently about securing a favorable rate. Another admits he misjudged a weight by a fraction. They laugh, not unkindly. Commerce here feels competitive but communal. Historians still argue about when Mali's gradual decline truly began, whether internal succession disputes weakened cohesion, or whether rising powers like Songhai Empire capitalized on shifting trade patterns first. The debate lingers in academic circles. Here, under lantern light, such transitions feel distant, almost unimaginable. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some accounts suggest that certain desert traders would tap salt slabs lightly before loading them, listening for a particular resonance that indicated structural integrity. Whether scientifically reliable or simply ritualistic, the practice reflects how intimately these merchants understood their cargo. You imagine someone gently knocking on a salt block like at Essador, just checking you re-sturdy, my friend. The air cools further. The breeze now carries faint moisture from the Niger, softening the dryness that dominated midday. Somewhere in the distance, a quiet call to prayer threads through the darkening sky, steady and melodic. Trade and faith intertwine once more, just as they have all day. You sit near the well, recalling its earlier dispute. Now it mirrors stars beginning to appear overhead. Water and sky briefly become twins. It strikes you that so much of this empire rests on elements that seem simple water, mineral, metal, yet their orchestration creates something vast. Mainstream historical fact, Timbuktu's prominence in the 14th century was part of a broader trans-Saharan network, linking West Africa to North Africa and indirectly to Mediterranean and Middle Eastern markets. Gold from here influenced coinage and economies far beyond the dunes. Yet that global impact begins with moments exactly like this lantern's dimming. Traders recounting their day, historians still debate the full extent of West Africa's economic integration with Europe before the Atlantic trade era reshaped global systems. Archaeology continues to reveal fragments, coins, ceramics, manuscripts that hint at deeper connections than once assumed. The story is still unfolding. A camel shifts nearby, exhaling with theatrical resignation. You suspect it is composing its own memoir about carrying half an empire on its back. If camels could demand royalties from history books, they might retire comfortably. The square quiets further. One by one, lanterns are lowered. Footsteps retreat into narrow alleys. Doors close with soft thuds. You feel the day receding, not erased, but absorbed into memory. Tomorrow, salt will gleam again. Gold will weigh heavy in careful palms. Wells will reflect the sun. The cycle will resume with familiar precision. But for now, the market rests. The air grows gentler. Sounds thin into near silence. The packed earth releases the last of its stored warmth, rising softly around you. You breathe in the faint mineral scent that lingers, and it feels less sharp now, more like a quiet reminder than a demand. The empire, vast and complex, narrows to this single square under starlight, and you sit within it, unhurried, letting the stillness stretch. The lantern glow fades to embers. The well reflects only constellations. Camels settle fully into the sand. Your thoughts slow, like caravans disappearing beyond the horizon. Nothing urgent remains, only the soft memory of bells, the echo of measured voices, the steady knowledge that trade will return with dawn. For now, you rest beside stacked salt and sleeping streets, wrapped in warm desert night as history itself seems to exhale and drift. And as the stars brighten overhead, you let your breathing match their quiet rhythm, steady and unbroken, until the marketplace, the empire, the dunes, and even the distant river dissolve gently into calm.